2 seconds.
And there we are. All right. So, hey, one and all, whomever is out there, this is the new COVID-style version of Drinking and Talking, my old podcast, which I kind of put on ice for a while because you can't go to bars and meet people, which was mostly how I conducted that podcast. But I did do a few Skype podcasts in the past, one of which famously with Chad Post, famous to me at least, went like 3 hours and had to be cut up into 3 different segments where we talked about a lot of random shit. And Chad's back for the Drinking and Talking 2.0 YouTube version. So needs no introduction. This is Chad W. Post, publisher at Open Letter Books, which if you don't know Open Letter, we'll be talking a little bit about them in a second. But how's it going, Chad?
It's going pretty well, man. How are you doing? Thanks for having me on here.
Yeah, my pleasure. You're always a lively guest. And it's good. It's been a good day so far.
I think I needed all that time to recover.
That was a long chat with a lot of booze.
Yeah.
Like I remember drinking a lot more than I intended to.
Same.
Because I'm doing the same thing as I'm starting with the hard stuff, thinking I won't drink as much of that. But that was my downfall last time. I was like doing Guinness and whiskey.
I've got a stout and a Jameson.
Ooh, nice. What are you drinking?
The Majestic Imperial Stout from the brewery right down a baseball throw from my room.
Is it me or Rochester has a lot of breweries from what I've noticed?
It's basically like if you graduate from college, you're like, do you want to own a coffee shop or a brewery now? Like, which one are we going to do? And there's just like a million of them. There's the alcohol level in this part of the world is pretty high for probably good reason. I mean,
I was going to say, is there anything behind it? I mean, don't you have those beautiful Finger Lakes to remind you that life's worth living?
And if you look out and like go downtown, it's just like the biggest piece of property in Rochester that's the most hotly debated as to what to do with it is a giant empty parking lot in downtown. That's just in the middle of downtown. It's just a flat thing called Parcel 5.
I've only been there once for the conference. Yeah, so I must have. But I do remember being I remember like you, me, Brian Wood, and bunch of other people went to some bar the first night, which was, I just remember, playing pinball for an hour and then sitting with you guys, and everybody kept trying to tell me to eat meatballs at this place. So I don't know if you know what that bar is.
Yeah, Skylark was the first meatball bar, and I think they are done.
Oh, really?
They closed
COVID victims?
Beginning of COVID, and there was like no signs. It was like, we'll be back sometime, ? And then they reopened, and then it looked closed again last time I went by there.
Sure.
So I don't know though, because all the rules are like so hit or miss, and everything's like now only open on like Friday nights and Saturday, and so I just never know. Like I used to go for after therapy, I'd have lunch on Tuesdays. There's no lunch places that are open anymore on Tuesdays.
Jesus. Well, that was the other big thing is the food scene or something. You told me was kind of like, or it was being sort of advertised if it existed or not.
They advertise it as if we've got like Chicago level chef here in Rochester, and really it's just like garbage plates and pizza.
Yeah, well there you go. Well, I mentioned that bar because I do remember my big Rochester memory that I don't know if I ever told you was walking back to my hotel after that bar. And I don't know, whatever hotel I stayed at was the same one that the conference was at. So it was kind of, I guess, in downtown Rochester. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know, like, where one place is to another. I just know we started at that bar, and I had a vague idea of how to get back to the hotel, which I eventually found after getting mildly lost. But, like, whatever was between those two things, that bar and that hotel, was not awesome. It was just, like, I would go from what looked like dense, kind of urban, there's people around, and there's, like, oh, there's something open, to, like, wasteland, empty lot, and then I'm like, where am I going to get, like, this is where I die, is what the feeling was. Yeah. And then I saw the hotel, and I'm like, thank God.
That hotel is sold and is no longer in business at all.
Thank God, man. It pox.
They were going to tear it down.
I will dance on its grave. That was not a great hotel. I mean, my room was fine, but just like the elevators were all out of service, so I had to take the freight elevator, and I was sharing it with whatever other conference was going on, which was, it looked to be like a bunch of men in like with medals around their chests who look like African dignitaries.
Oh, right. I remember that. I thought there was also, like, on one of the days, it was like a modeling thing. Like women were trying to become like part of like a modeling casting agency, or I don't know what, I mean?
It was a very odd collection of people.
And then a bunch of like nerdy writers.
Yeah. All of us with like moleskins and just like, and just sweating like hope and fear. Like, I get to talk to an agent.
Oh my God, those people were so nervous about meeting an agent. That was wild. Well, that bar Skylark with the meatballs is great, but we also started at a different bar, which I don't think exists anymore either.
Oh no.
In which we gave a reading, and that was where my character came into life. Greg Underwood. Greg Underwood made his appearance there.
Your Andy Kaufman character.
Literature.
That was the strangest reading I've ever been involved with, and I've been involved in what I would think were like some really small coffee house stuff and some slightly more like whatever Chicago's literati will have something like volumes, and I like worm my way into it somehow. Like, oh wow, there's actually people here. I've been like in a fair number of readings, and that was the oddest thing I've ever done. How do I follow you and your Andy Kaufman like character of the Cubs fan, if I remember correctly? Did I bring you a Cubs hat?
You brought me a Cubs hat. I think it might have just been blue in the end. Like, I mean, you could have had a Cubs one or something, but it was a Cubs representative one. And Greg Underwood was this character that we created for a podcast called Rock in Your Mouth. That was like a satirical take on like the food scene of Rochester. And would never really talk about food. It'd just be like these three people arguing and being like just obnoxious. And Greg's bit was that he had a really thick stutter, and he also like was super fat and did like but he believed CrossFit was essentially like you go to the gym and eat, donuts and drink as much as you can. He got obsessed with guns at the end of the first season. He was like a nut job. So when we did this reading, like I dressed up as what I believed that he would look like. I didn't shave my neck for like 3 or 4 weeks. Like it was just like all just like gross as shit. I got like the gel and just slicked back everything. I dyed my beard. I did like all sorts of things, had like the ripped pants, socks that didn't quite fit anything. Everything was like a joke, and they're stuffed with a big stomach. So went there, and like one of my friends, Rachel, that was there, Rachel Crawford, who has a bookstore called the Kimbo Books, like an online bookstore here. She was there. And it wasn't until I started reading that she realized it was me. Honestly, like, nice to meet you. I was like, yep. And like, just like played it and just as straight as I could, walked all the way from my house in the fucking summer heat past all these people that are like, what are you? Just to pull off one joke.
One joke to the smallest group of people that you ever get it. You're like the musician who will like drive 7 hours to play a gig at a bar for $50. Like, it doesn't really matter. It's the art that you committed yourself to. I mean,
I read all those poems that I wrote for it.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember reading I knew what was coming, so I wasn't like, totally nonplussed, but like I did sort of go, I don't really like, I had no problem with it and I had no problem reading, but my thought was like, we should just close it. Like, how do you follow that? Like, it was too weird to then be like, well, here, I'm going to read something. And I'll never forget, like, seriously, I'll never forget that prior to that, we were having a beer at some, like, I think it was like a German restaurant he took me to in Rochester. That was pretty nice. And so I was pretty full of beers and food. And that's when I met Brian. And I remember Brian said, I'll never forget this because it's just like, it still stands as one of the funniest things I heard was, you're not really going to read a poem, are you? And I was like, well, maybe, I don't know. So it's just like, and then there's Chad doing this thing. I'm like, no, maybe I shouldn't read a poem. Maybe I should just like read the room. This is not like maybe the time for my, to bring out my sonnets.
This COVID thing has broken me in so many ways and like made everything so much more difficult. But when it first started and we were doing the 2-month review, it was like a creative inspiration to try and come up with a new way to enter into that podcast and do like different characters or different bits. And it was really fun. And now it's like, I don't even have the energy for that. Like, I was like, a good period. Now I'm just like, yeah, hey, welcome, man. Let's talk.
Well, this is the third. This is like the third. Oh, go ahead. I thot I was talking over you. Go ahead.
No.
I was gonna say, this is like the third one of these I've done in a while, which is like a burst of doing. Like, I did an interview with my publisher, and then I did like a reading, and now I'm doing this, and it's like, oh, this is fun, but I, already I can sort of see this becoming like a distraction that will soon turn into not a chore necessarily, but it's just like, what's the point? We're all dead in a year anyway. Like,
Kaya got vaccinated today.
Oh, really? Nice.
I've got my appointment from March 18th.
Sweet. Are you getting the one Johnson & Johnson one, or you got to get the 2 doses?
She got the Pfizer one.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, that's my wife got the Pfizer.
Give me fucking anything. I don't care. Like I literally legitimately like just be like, it's a new brand that you've not heard of, but it's a vaccine. And be like, put it in me. Put whatever you want to put in me, put it in wherever, however you need to do it. I just do not want to deal with this shit anymore.
Some like, former Yugoslavian countries suppository that, whatever. But I did hear, my stepdad told me that people say if you take a multivitamin, a baby aspirin, and vitamin D, it's like the same as the shot. Maybe. I mean, I don't know.
I used to have this firm belief that Advil cold and sinus could cure anything. That if you distilled it and just like inhaled it or shot yourself up with it, it would cure cancer, it would cure AIDS, it would do whatever, it didn't matter. Advil cold and sinus was like my wonder drug throughout college.
This is speaking to like every culture that I meet has something like that. So like my wife's Mexican and she introduced me to this thing that every Mexican kid knows, which is like, no matter what disease you get, your mother will rub you down with vapor rub. Or Vaporu, as they call it. Like Vicks Vapor Rub is the cure-all. And like I did get kind of like, I felt sick one day and she's like, put on some Vaporu, and I rubbed it on my chest, like, and it's disgusting. And I went to sleep, and God, if I didn't wake up feeling amazing. So yeah, maybe.
I will never forget that smell. That is like if you don't smell that, then you have COVID. Because that thing is like, it's like spearmint crack. Like it's like aggressive on your nostrils and on every part of you. Like it's so intense. My mom used to use that. She lived by that as well.
Nice. I mean, I'm just happy people are getting vaccinated. I'm happy that you're taking. I knew you would. I didn't think you were an anti-vaxxer, but I'm glad you're taking it. Taking it seriously. Whatever cures want to take, like I'll try anything. I'm with you on that. So I'm guessing you really want this to end. You're not relishing this experience.
Not at all. Like I hate it more than I've hated anything in my life, and I have a lot of hate. Like I've spent years perfecting hate as like a way of interacting with the world, and this took it so far into the other side that now I just like happy. I guess it's not even fun.
Like cycles, like you're like another sadness is coming or something.
Oh my God! I mean, I came back from London and Amsterdam on March 15th last year. And like, that's, all that will, by the time I get vaccinated, it'll have been a whole year in which that's the first year since I started working in publishing. I didn't go anywhere. I didn't see anyone. I didn't like interact with like any part of the literary community in person. Like and that's really weird. Like I spent so much of my time, like early on, just talking to people, being like a marketing person and publicity person and knowing people and seeing people and being at all those things. And I do love that. And even if I'm older now and don't have to do it and don't feel like quite the same urge, the same FOMO that I did as a kid, it's so weird not to like have interactions. Like just a general low level. I mean, the interactions with the publishing world are sort of specific because you're usually like going to a conference or whatever, but like this staying inside, and like I go to teach at the university, I won't see anyone except for the kids in my class. There's like no one around. And like the low level conversations that used to be normal, like saying hi or seeing someone, passing through groups of people, just small interactions. Without that, it feels really dire to me. Like it's like we might as well. I mean, maybe the world did end, and this is just like the last like memories that people have, and that really it's just all there's Jacob's ladder long time ago. And we're all just like sort of feeling out these last death throes into nothingness. Because I can't take it. Kai, by contrast, is very introverted and loves this. So I don't understand her at all either. I think it's sort of like, that's like my wife and me, where like my wife is just chomping at the bit to jump on a plane and let's go somewhere. Because we used to, that was one of the things that I never really did a lot of traveling until I met her. Like I did a lot of road trips with my family as a kid, but I never left the country until like I met her. And it was like one of the things I always wanted to do. And I was so broke in my 20s that it's like all my friends were like going off to Paris for 3 months. And I was like, fuckers, I can't join you. Yeah. But like, we've been to Mexico like 3 times with her, and we've been to Europe, and we went to Taiwan once famously and spent Christmas. It's like we had these really great adventures and we haven't done any of that. And there's a part of me that as I'm, approaching 50, I get like, oh, I could slow down and not do this. But I still do kind of like miss being able to do that. But she is like, as soon as we both get vaccinated, she wants to do something. Whereas I'm like, I could probably spend more time just like doing the thing that I do at home by myself. And I think it's just like today was a great day. Today, I literally like my wife went to work, I walked my dog, and then I made food, and then I wrote like 2,000 words, which for me is a huge day. Like if I write that much, that's a big day. And it's like, because I didn't have any grading to do.
And then I read for like 2 hours, a book for pleasure. And I was like, holy fuck, this is amazing. Then my wife came home and I made her dinner. And then it's just like, yeah, I could be a stay-at-home dad and do nothing. But I mean, I probably would want to kill myself after a while. But
so this is a weird segue for you, but I have booked a trip to Dublin for May 6th through 13th or something like that.
Really?
My last class is that Thursday, May 6th. And then I fly out from Buffalo for a stay in Dublin, which was like the cheapest thing I've ever bought.
Wow. Just for the hell of it? Nothing connected to the press or anything else?
Not connected to the press, but semi-connected to Delkey, because Delkey has a Dublin office.
That's right, they do.
Yes.
Which I looked at a job ad there once, and
they're
knowing enough about Delkey's past employment practices, I kind of decided not to take it. But I'm like, maybe I could put up with a slightly unstable work environment if I was living in Dublin. But
yeah, so. I know. No, I'm like, if the university is like, you know what, we don't want to have is your press, I'll be like, boom, I'm in Dublin running Delkey from there over.
If that's the case, then I'm definitely going to bug you for a job, because because that's the thing. Like, I guess I should also mention, I mean, that like, yes, Chad is the publisher and the head of Open Letter. I don't know what your exact title is. I just say publisher. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. But Chad's, I guess, that was your first job in publishing, was working for Delkey Archive, right?
Yep.
And so that was sort of
before that.
What's that?
I worked at bookstores, and then
that
was the publishing jump.
So, like, the head of Delkey Archive, sort of, again, another sort of infamous figure in publishing, John O'Brien, passed away recently. You and John, I know, had a very complicated history, but you're like, whatever went on between you is kind of, you buried the hatchet before he passed, and now you're kind of, you and Will Evans are kind of like carrying on Delkey's. I guess I'll admit that I'm like slightly confused. Like, it's basically going to exist as a press separate from what you're doing with Open Letter, but you and Will are kind of like the brainchildren behind it. It's not like you're combining stuff, right?
Not at the moment, although that would be ideal as like a route in the future. And what that could look like could be any number of different things involving the university, involving like whatever we do with employees and like different programs and funding that we can get. So the idea is that they will all work together, even if they're not physically the same 501c3, but that there's some overlap. And the deal was that, I can explain it, and there's actually like a pretty funny story. So initially I talked to John and was like, what are you going to do now that you have no employees? You're not on a campus, like everything's like fucked. And this was in the summer of 2019. And he was like, oh, thanks for reaching out. He called me and was like, I don't know what to do. I want to get everything, fixed again, but all the employees that I've hired are terrible. Nothing works. Everything's fucked. Like they're all so stupid and just such a bad job. But like, I'd really like the books to survive somehow. And these roundabout, like, John conversations that were like repetitive and never actually got to doing a thing. Along the way, he was like, well, what I would like is if you would take over Delkey, you could essentially have the press, and like could be based at the University of Rochester as under Open Letter. You could just run it and have the press. But we need to get it working first to make it function. At some point during that, it became very clear that John had no idea how much money he probably owed to like everyone. Yeah. And like, I asked him at some point, like, what is the money situation? Because the university is not going to want to just like blindly go into this situation. He's like, I owe like $23,000. He had like some very specific number. That is not accurate. And I knew even at the time that wasn't accurate. And at this point in time, there's nothing. The university won't let you do anything. They took away our like retirement benefits apparently, because I got an email saying that they're coming back, and I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, didn't realize that had happened. I know that I don't have eye insurance anymore for some reason. That vision is not part of our insurance package, but that sucks too. But like, they're not going to be like, oh yeah, let's get this press. Totally makes sense. They have great history. They've got money that's coming in. They also just owe like, $200,000 maybe. Who knows? Like, we don't know. And so in the process of that, what we figured out was that if the assets and the company itself went to be under Deep Vellum, if the transfer went to Deep Vellum, then all of the business, all of the money, all of the fundraising, and all the investments could happen through there and solve Delkey's problem with money. And the university would not have to do with any part of that. but the university gets the benefit of that. John wanted me to be the editorial oversight. So I get to like be the editor for it. I like the oversee the editorial with Will and like make sure the books are coming out and that they're the quality of like a Delkey book or whatever you conceive of as Delkey 2.0 or 3.0 or whatever you want to call it at this point.
It's got to be at least 4.0 at this point.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, there's like the Steve Moore, non-Steve Moore, me, Martin Riker and me, Jeremy Davies, and then it's dead. So yeah, so like 5, whatever fifth variation of like the editorial side of things would be. And that way we can do it and can like get the books and help maintain this. Because Will loves the Delkey's list and Delkey's existence, but he's not read a lot of the books. I mean, most people haven't. There's almost 1,000.
There's a lot of books, yeah.
And like when we were there in his basement cleaning things out, so John was supposed to sign this agreement to begin this process in like October 20th, right? And they set up a meeting for that. Will would fly to Bloomington Normal. John's son, who's also named Will O'Brien, would come, and he's at the head of the board, and they would like finalize this, like the agreement saying this is what was going to happen. And then there'll be like one more agreement signed in December saying the assets have officially been transferred. Everything now belongs to Deep Vellum. But the first one, like the letter of intent, they're going to sign it this weekend. And instead, Will O'Brien fell down the stairs and broke his ankle and had to cancel the trip. So they're like, cancel. So they reschedule for like 2 or 3 weeks later. Will Evans flies into Bloomington Normal on a Saturday afternoon. They go out to dinner at the steakhouse in the middle of the pandemic in this old steakhouse called Jim's Steakhouse. That's literally like, in my memory, it's like just a lot of like dark wood, animals on the wall and like carpet, like just like it's like the place that like, there would be like a funeral home restaurant, right? Jesus. And we go there and they're like, John's telling Will all these stories. Will's like, you just need to sign this thing. You just need to sign this thing. Make this happen. Just need to sign this thing. Goes home to his hotel, wakes up and has a series of messages from John at like 4 a.m, being like, you need to come out here at 8. We need to figure this thing out. We need to take care of this book, blah, 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 blah. And then when Will wakes up, he goes for a run and gets a call from Will O'Brien, who's like, my dad's in the hospital. He had a heart attack. Jesus. So Will Evans just flew home. So then this thing's still not signed and there's nothing we can do. Like there's nothing you can literally do. And at some point I had been helping John in lots of ways and doing like lots of hours of things to try and make this all function. But there's points where it's like, no, fuck this. Like this is just being taken advantage of. And if this doesn't work out, like this is nonsense. So we weren't going to do anything. And then like weeks go by, it's John's birthday. I sent him a message being like, I hope you had a birthday. I'm sorry that you were in the hospital, that you had this heart attack. I hope that we can meet up in December and go over things in person because that would be really great. He's like, yes, this would be wonderful. I just really love like the idea that this is what's going to happen for the press and that there's a future and what you guys are doing is really exciting, blah, blah, blah. That was like on a Wednesday. On Friday, he signs the agreement, sends it in an email to Will Evans, and then the next day has a heart attack and dies.
Jesus Christ.
So like he was literally living for that thing to happen.
Yeah, I think once he knew it was settled, maybe. I mean, Delkey Archive is, I don't know who's, this is just you and me chatting and it's like people listen. I don't know if anyone who's like, checking this out, but like some of my friends have to be aware of it because a lot of Delkey has been sort of like a name that I've been following for years, which is kind of how I found out who you were. When Susan Harris from Wars Without Borders was when I was working with her, and she was like, oh yeah, Chad Post was working with them and like, left and now he's starting his own press. And that's how I found out about Open Letter. But like Delkey was like kind of a big press when I was in, I want to say, grad school at Northwestern, because a lot of the books that, like, I remember I had one teacher who was very contemptuous of Delkey as a press because he was kind of like, remains the most pompous, like professorial asshole I've ever met. But he was sort of like, we were reading some book, me and this kid in my class, and he's like, who put that out? We're like, oh, it's Delkey Archive. He goes, oh, of course they would put something like that out. It was like, he just, like, I never quite knew what that meant. But like Delkey had a reputation for being, like they will put out things that no other press will touch. And they were really committed to like a certain standard of like an idea of literature, which I guess is kind of like segues into like one of the reasons like I wanted to talk to you, because you wrote this really interesting thing about, you've written a couple of entries about like going back and revisiting the Tolkien offices, and the whole story about how Bottom's Dream has like rats living in it now is kind of hilarious to me now, because like Bottom's Dream is this insanely dense, like almost like I don't like to use the word unreadable because no text is, but like it's an intimidating book that's like what 15 pounds, and like this giant like thing that Tolkien published in a limited series that's like in a giant slipcase. You have to like, you know, I joked with you last time, you have to get your own piece of furniture for the fucking thing. It's just imposing. And that like I really wanted to buy a copy, and I saw a copy at I think Seminary Co-op, and it was like $70, and I was like, oh, I'll get it, you know, maybe when I get a little more money that I feel like spending, and it'll be around. And my whole thought process was like, Dulkey's big thing was like, we don't let books go out of print, like we take on books that no one else will, and we make them live, you know, beyond like their marketability or sellability or whatever. And it's just like, I didn't get it then, and then they disappeared from the stores, and now all the copies apparently that exist are rat infested.
All but, you know, a high percentage are living. Yeah, there are rats inside of a lot of them. I saw this great thing in this month's Harper's magazine has like a interview with a employee who worked at the Chipotle in New York City that got infested with rats, and it's just him talking about the rats. He's like, they love avocados, but they
avocados in German literature.
They really love avocados. So yeah, and crazy German literature. Yeah, that I'm surprised that the book was out of print too in that way. And we found the whole story and the whole email thread, and most of it's pretty banal. But like the foundation, the Arno Schmidt Stiftung, or whatever, however you pronounce it, the foundation this very wealthy European guy has created and invests in. They handled all of it. So they printed it in Germany. They did the design. They did all of the aspects of it, and just had Delkey sell like 2,000 copies, I think they're given, or maybe 2,500, something like a pretty relatively low number. But for a book like that, probably, you know, huge. Yeah. And the prices were really low because they wanted it to be sort of subsidized rather than be like $150 sort of collector's item, so that it would be more accessible to people. And then they were just always going to do one print run and then maybe do a paperback version. But as part of the agreement, Delkey had to pay a royalty on every sale, and that never happened. So we're fixing that to try and have been in touch about like, how can we do this as a paperback? What would this entail? But part of it is still like that money thing of like,
right.
I mean, like it's so funny because like, do you know Calder editions?
Yeah. I think I might have a couple of those laying around from some of the used bookstores I used to come through. They're not like popping up everywhere, but yeah.
There's a pretty solid overlap in aesthetics between Calder and John.
Mm-hmm.
Canot books, the Nouveau Roman,
right.
A lot of French stuff like that, and like the more experimental things. Like John Calder was really into like experimental stuff. John Calder was like the ultimate publisher con man. Like when I meet him regularly in London when he was alive, and he was like threadbare, you know, patched up like tweed jacket, his cane. He'd take us to like the Scottish men's club that he belonged to. It was at a point where Delkey was going to acquire Calder because Calder wanted to give up publishing and just run like this bookstore and this thing for Beckett's plays. And Beckett's was a Calder author.
Right.
And so he was looking to sell it. And so we'd have like these dinners, and he'd tell these stories about like how happy he was that he never paid Beckett a dime, and all the ways that he would like lie to people to like get away with not paying things. And he would, and to understand what was going on at their company, he had like all of the publishing house and the rights. And this is the big question that we have right now. Like, what rights do we still have? What are the contracts? We don't have the physical contracts at the moment. They're like in Bloomington, Illinois. So like there's certain things that you're just like, I just don't know. I don't know what the deal is. And so far it's all been fine, but nevertheless, like for Calder, it was like, what does he actually have? And what is he lying about? And what is an exaggeration? Like this guy is like, his life has been just a little on the edge, just staying on that. And in his basement, he had 3 sets of accounting books. And so he's like looking through them. I was like, why do you have 3 sets of accounting books? He's like, well, there's Calder Publications Limited, there's Calder Limited, and there's like some other variation on the name. And he's like, so when someone sues me, I just transfer all the assets to a different one. And then when they sue this one, there's nothing for them to get. So they can't like they can win in court, but there's like no damage settlement. So I never have to pay anyone for these things. And he like never paid his translators. He never like, he's just like a rogue, like a rakish dude that wanted to do crazy literature that was difficult but important and like helped the world and the world's like aesthetics and ideas. But like, you know, there's no money in it. And so he just sort of like cheated his way through to creating this cultural like monolith. And Delkey was not that initially. Delkey was very much more pure and much more like did things by like just having the successes, making things work just right, just enough to make things work, and to get things through like universities, right funding to get the right book that just happens to work out. There's a part I don't know if you finished JR, but there's part at the end where Duncan, Senator Cates or whatever is in the hospital, and he's like, this publishing company, this is nonsense. You can't even make a balance sheet out of this. You might as well be a fortune teller. You got 10 books, you print 10 books. One of them's going to sell, 9 of them to keep the other 9 afloat. What is this? This is fortune telling. This isn't how you make a budget. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. But like Delkey would always survive that way. And then like after John kept getting ill and things started going downhill, it became like the rug was pulled out. So all of those kind of con tendencies, the small press, were just like illuminated and became like the thing.
If you're like a nerd like I am, where I mean, I sort of for a while I still like organize some of my bookshelves by press rather than by author, because you know I'm just kind of nerdish about press. I think it's the same thing in the '90s when I was really into like record labels that were indie labels, and it's just like, you know, you want to check out a band that's on the same label as a band you like. Like I started doing that. It started with New Directions and Grove, which were like, you know, these long-standing American presses I have. Speaking of Beckett and Grove, there's a nice How It Is, which is my first difficult book that I was grabbing a collection of so-called difficult books for our chat, and that's one of them. But it's like Grove and New Directions. Like if I saw a book in a used bookstore that had like those from those presses, I'd pick it up and check it out. And it's just like Delkey very quickly became one too, because I can't remember the first Delkey book that I bought. I don't think it was Flann O'Brien, but it might have been. No, it was Felipe Alfayou, the Locos, which is an amazing fucking book. Yeah, and I actually have a vintage copy of that, like from Vintage Press. And when Delkey put it out, like, and I read an interview with him on the website where I don't know who was interviewing him, and he was the author, and they were trying to convince him that like that's the book, like one of the books that kind of kept Delkey afloat. And he's like, oh, it's impossible to believe, because he was just a failed writer, former banker or something at that point. Yeah, but like
living in an old folks home, like a retirement home, and he's like, you know, just trying to be like the sexy Spanish man picking up all the ladies. And he also like, he has a great line in that interview where he says something like, you know, fascism isn't great, but at least you only have to listen to one asshole instead of every asshole on the street.
He was definitely an interesting guy, and it just like, that book really locked in with me because it was just reminding me of everything else I was loving at the time, like Calvino and Borges. It's just like right in that vein. So, but that was like maybe my first Delkey book, and then I just started picking up. And there was a bookstore in the north side of Chicago, in the Edgewater neighborhood, which is a neighborhood that like at that time, like nobody would open a bookstore in that fucking neighborhood. Yeah. And it was called Left of Center, which is you know, a fine title, but like it was a tiny little place. And the woman said, like, I'm only stocking books I like, which is like the surest way to go out of business. And she did indeed go out of business. But she had like a shit ton of Delkey books. And I bought like a lot of them from her in the year that she was around, because I was living right on the, like down the block from there. And I just remember like that's when I kind of started to really like focus on that press. So I remember like witnessing like digging back and seeing like some of the older books that they'd published that were before I started paying attention to them. And then right around the time of them was like, I think, in fact, it's probably a book. I know it's a book you worked on, which was Thank You for Not Reading, the Precinct. Like that's another one that I bought like and just devoured like as soon as it came out. And like I kept thinking, this is a press that's doing really interesting things. And it's in Illinois. There's a big Chicago connection. Like I love everything about this place. And then all the way up until like maybe about, I don't know, 5 some years ago, like it just seems like everything changed. Like the books looked different. They felt different. I couldn't find them in any store but the Seminary Co-op. And I just kind of assumed from like, you know, witnessing that and maybe talking to people like you in the know, Delkey's coming into some hard times, or like, I don't know what the fuck's going on with this press, but like, as much as I love what they do, I just would get a sense from the rumblings I'd hear of like it was an unstable ship at times.
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. And that's what when I'm gonna move a little bit here, and
Go nuts.
I'm gonna also ask if it's okay to say offensive things, right?
I don't care. I don't think anyone. I think we're all adults here.
Right? Okay. Because I will. But
sorry, Mom, if you're watching. But go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, but I mean, it's like publishing gossip offensive. Like nobody who doesn't know is going to care, okay. And that's fine. But when we were there in Bloomington Normal and going through John's stuff and trying to figure out what the fuck everything was and what the passwords were and which books are there, it was like literally like going through what had been. It's so funny. There's a video of it on the Substack, but there's the way that the library had been set up in John's basement. It used to be like this incredible sprawling library of all different, organized by country and author, and it's just like everything. And there's so many books that like we ended up reissuing because we'd be walking through the library and be like, what's this? Like Bridget Bropey's In Transit is one of those. That was like, what is this book? And it's got like, 2 words on top of each other. So that and when you make a choice as to like which one to read or which one can be meaningful, it was like a very experimental, strange book about being in an airport basically the whole time, and like the nature of being in transit in between spaces. And it was really fucking cool, but it was just because it was on that shelf. Now, totally disorganized. There'd been a flood. Half the things were all just missing. It's just gone. And then all the Delkey books, which used to be in like, a nicely arrayed area where you could mail them, were on the bottom shelf alphabetically all the way around this entire office in like a winding through rooms and offices way, which is like the most illogical thing ever. So I went through to try and get a copy of every single book that I could get a copy of, I got. And there were like billions I just never heard of. And like up until like when I left, I think there were like 450 books that Delkey had published. And I think I had read like 350 of them at that time. And now there's almost 1,000. And a lot of them you just never even heard of.
No, they got no attention. This
book?
What is that?
It's called My Husband.
No.
By Rumina Buzrovkova or something to that effect. Nope. Sorry, Rumina. I love your book. This came out, I think, not that long ago. It's from Macedonia. She was like the person who like made the Me Too movement in Macedonia happen. And it's like an amazing fucking book. It's so funny. Like there's like so many veins of Delkey's aesthetic styles. They all like sort of coalesce around what you're saying about difficult. And we can get into like the idea of what difficult is in a second too. But they coalesce in this general grouping for the most part. There's certain books that are funded that you're like, well, this book doesn't fit, but it was clearly like had money, right? Yeah. Or like there's some other reason that this happened. That's not like the same thing. But there's a whole train of things which is really underrepresented in the public discourse about Delkey, especially of female authors that are very funny and very sarcastic and very like biting. So like, thank you, Brennan.
Oh yeah,
we're reissuing through Open Letter this fall. Oddly enough, so we're flipping that over. Because it had gone out of print and John had lost the rights, and Dubravka wants everything in one place, and she's really pissed at New Directions won't give up Museum of Unconditional
Surrender. Yes,
it's the only book that we don't have the rights to, basically.
That's a great book.
And this is where I'll start talking shit. I've already had one whiskey.
Ooh, all right, here we go. Literary gossip.
Now for why they cannot give the rights up is because they would lose so much money by not having that book in print still. It's been in print for
really. Wait, that's a moneymaker for them?
No.
I can't imagine it is. Nobody.
It included, the line that I saw that was sent to the agent included a line that said, well, I think it's important for her reputation to have a book with a press like ours.
Oh, fuck. Aren't you friends with them? That's kind of a
They actually got an email saying, are you mad at me for this situation? I was like, no, it's cool.
Whatever. Cool. I guess it's the game, man. The game is the game.
They don't hate the player. But the agent that's involved in it, the Wiley agency, they can just go fuck themselves straight.
Oh, well. Okay, so as a publisher, I don't know like how deeply you've dealt with them, but like Wiley, of course, is like every writer dreams of getting signed by Wiley, and every publisher like dreads having to deal with them, is what I've heard.
They just took away our rights to Alejandro Zambra's The Private Lives of Trees.
Oh, really?
Wouldn't even tell us about it, didn't negotiate anything. They sold the world rights to Fitzcarraldo editions, and they're like, you can't have your book anymore. I was like, no, we were talking about renewing the lease. And they're like, sorry, this other press is more committed. And I haven't written this back, but I'm going to, is like, well, it's really ballsy of Fitzy to invest so much money in such a mediocre writer with so much mediocrity in his work. Like, wow, that's really impressive. Like, good on him. Bully for you, Fitzcarraldo.
Wow, now we're talking some serious shit.
Told ya. Let's do this.
I kind of liked Bonsai, but I'll admit I did buy Private Life of Trees because of the strength of Bonsai. But Bonsai is like, I stopped reading him after Private Life of Trees because I remember thinking Bonsai was good because of its brevity, and maybe, like, I don't want to say he was a one-trick pony, but I haven't investigated him since. So there's a whole other slew of like South American writers that I would probably get more excited about. So
he really hates me because I wrote a review, because he went from, I think it's very confusing. When I was in Guadalajara, was the last book fair I was at, and I got 2 messages from him. One through his friend who had bought the rights to Private Lives of Trees from Andrea Montejo, who runs the Indent agency. And she's like, Alejandro's here, and he said to say hi. And I was like, okay. And then I got a message from Will Vanderheiden, who saw him, who's like, yeah, Alejandro came up to me and Rodrigo Frazan and said, tell Chad that he's a fucking piece of shit asshole. Okay. The 2, probably the latter, but I reviewed
imagine
Days of Being, and it was so bad. It was so bad. So bad. And that multiple choice book is so precious. Like, I just think he's not really very good, but he's like locked in as like a figure. And so I don't mind losing. It sucks to lose the book because it sells well and it's cheap to like print because it's small, but it's also like basically just a short story.
No, it's a fine book. I don't remember it being, something I would like threw across the room or anything. No. But when I think of him, I think of Bonsai, which is the only book of his that like ever made an impression.
Same.
So, yeah. So on the subject of difficult books, which is something that like I know you wrote about in regard to Bottom Stream, and like I tried to pull like the so-called difficult books that were like popping out from my bookshelves, and I picked 2 open letter books. One I read and one I haven't. So let's talk about the hardest book I've ever, like the most so-called difficult book that I've read, and it's like I'm gonna first of all, I'm wearing my Finnegan's Wake shirt. First we.
I thought I wasn't 100% sure. I've got Los so. Yeah.
Well, yeah, there you go. So like this is apparently the most difficult book to read in English. And, I feel kind of like guilty every time I like brag about having read it, because it's just like I'm perpetuating this idea that the book is unreadable or that books are unreadable. Like if you brag about having read something, like you're kind of complicit in the whole books are hard to read and look at me, I fucking read this book thing. But like the one book that I was thinking immediately before I got on, like, it was actually a more daunting experience that I don't think was like a chore to read, but still was like it took more out of me, was this fucking thing right here.
Oh, interesting. I just gave an interview about that book last week.
Yeah, and what was the talk about?
It was this woman who's doing a PhD on Russian writers and like politics of the books that got translated and like their political stance and whatnot. So it was basically like just a rundown of like how he came to that book, which I misremembered the story like almost completely. And then what I found out in the course of talking to her is that the UK, to continue complaining about agents and big presses, Mackelhaus and Quercus tried to buy Maidenhair from us when he got all the attention, because just can get all this attention. The book is difficult. I agree with you in terms of like, if we're going to define difficult, it is something that requires attention. Like, yeah. And to me, like, that's what's difficult to me is generally like attention. It like takes energy. It goes beyond just paying attention. There's like an energy, there's an involvement in it that you have to have. And for Finnegan's Wake, what's interesting is I didn't finish it, but I read like 75% of it.
Yeah,
and
you read a lot of it, I remember.
I read a huge part, and then I put it aside for like a month to do something and was like, I can't do this again. But I'd been every Tuesday, I would like get super stoned and read Finnegan's Wake. And that was like my Tuesday night experience. And it was like the greatest thing because it was an experience. Like it took something of like, but it was like a falling into it. Like I kept finding that like with Finnegan's Wake, there are all the annotations and the different books to help you sort of piece things together. And when I would read the book itself, find like what I was experiencing with it, usually would require like Googling a million things and going down some rabbit hole that was like definitely not related to what the book was, but like it was there. And so then I would read the annotations, and they would never mention the things I was looking at at all. It was like every time it was something different. But to me, it was like a great experience of reading it, and the experience didn't feel like it didn't feel like it took too much out of me. Whereas like books that take a lot out of you to like really work with is the ones I think of as being difficult. Like I think it's an energy thing rather than an intellectual thing.
No, you're right, because there are books that I think are way. I mean, like Finnegan's Wake is like the book that always gets the press for being difficult, because it is not. I mean, it's a book that's compiled of so many different languages and puns, like the famous like 8th chapter of it, the Anna Livia Plurabella chapter, which is like all the rivers of the world are in that book. And it's just like, I remember reading it, not paying attention to like, I'm just going to read, this. And there was a random moment where I stopped and said, I bet you if I Googled this thing here, it'd be a river. And I did, and it's some river in Russia. And it's just like, so clearly, like if you want to do all the work involved in understanding every line of it, like that's a lifetime experience, and go for it. But it's just like, I don't know. I mean, I read it like, the same thing. I mathematically cut it down to like, I think it was something like 13 pages a week. And so I was doing it Sunday nights. And then it's just, I would do that. And then like by the end, it took me a year, and I figured it's going to take me all year. But like during the week, I'll be bringing other books with me. Like I'm not just going to fucking read this, enough to the exclusion of everything else. And like, that's the way to go about the so-called like challenging. I think I like the word challenging more, even though that's really just a synonym. But to me, it's just like, it's not like reading, like a pot boiler, but it's definitely not. It didn't feel as daunting as I thought it would. Like, I think Joyce is which is why Joyce is one of my favorites. The same thing with Ulysses. It's like people talk about what a tough book it is, and it's a different book, but it's not really. I mean, if you just kind of read it and just surrender to the idea that I need to understand everything, I mean, you understand a lot. It's sort of like it's the same thing with JR. Like I know you're talking about JR, and I'm about 2 weeks behind on JR from where you all are in the thing, so I need to catch up. But it's like I'm sort of amazed at how accessible it is after all of that like baggage attached to Gaddis and guys like that, where it's just like they're impossible and it's daunting and it's big. And I started to think it's really more than anything the length of these books than anything.
I have like 10 thoughts I want to share with you based on this, okay? And I'm gonna try and accomplish some of them. Let me take another sip of this beer. So
please do.
The Finnegan's Wake thing, when I was doing the Bottom's Dream, and JR relates to this too. When I was doing the Bottom's Dream post, I became obsessed before that with the idea of the musicality of things, and that if you hear it, it's not hard. Like, and so we had Kaya, my daughter Chloe, and I all read the Bottom's Dream first page. Like, read it like in just there's 3 columns, so each person had a column, and what you did was listen to the middle column if you're on the right or the left. And when it hit the point where your line would be, you would say it. And I recorded and laid them all over top of each other. And and so when you listen to it, there's the 3% podcast. The last one is like a music episode that involves an interview with Chad Post, this guy that's a musician named Chad Post.
Right.
I know because people kept emailing me and being like, "What is this? You? Like, what are you doing?
Your new career?
You have a new career as like a sexy vocalist that has like bright blue eyes and doesn't wear a shirt very often." And I was like, I'd swap in a second.
Yeah, you can nail that. I think you're I mean, you hit the gym a lot. I think I know you. Yeah, sure.
Used to. There are no more gyms.
I know. We won't talk about the pounds I've added this year, but yeah.
Yeah, I work out. I do my Pilates. I love my Pilates. So, but JR is particular in this way. So when we talked about it on the podcast, we're like, it's not hard. It's not hard to read, but it does require a certain amount of like attention and whatever, some sort of retention aspect to it. So the audiobook for this week's episode, I was like, I'm not going to have time to read it. I just don't have time to read right now. Like I just don't have it. Like I have to be doing other things. I have to do a whole NEA grant, all this stuff. So I got the audiobook and listened to the section of the audiobook, and it's the greatest fucking thing I've ever heard in my fucking life.
Of JR?
Yeah.
Yeah, I read an interview with the guy who did it, and I want to read. Yeah. He said he cried when it was over. Oh, is he really? Oh God, I'll have to check it out because
as long as it all works out. But the thing about it is that he performs it, and as you listen, like I mean, reading that book, it was super funny, but then listening to it, I was like, literally, I'm crying. It's so so funny. And he does like voices like this is, if anyone listens to the 2-month review, this is sort of repetitious, but this week when he does the voice for Rhoda, you got to Rhoda, I'm sure. So Rhoda is like Janice from the Muppets. So she's like, hey man, come on, man. Let's just don't knock over my coat, man. Come on. And like they all like and Rick or JR is like Morty from Rick and Morty. Like, hey man, come on, Bast. Oh man, oh holy shit, Bast. Holy.
That absolutely makes sense, though.
Actually. It's so good. And like listening to that, if I had listened to it from the beginning as like someone who had been like, I'm not going to read this fucking book. It's 770 pages. It's got like no attributed dialogue. It's crazy. If I listened to that, I would have never thought that was difficult. There's not a second of it that's difficult.
That makes me feel like I want to like check out because I know I have Audible and I looked at it. It's about 36 hours, but that's the amount of time I spend listening to podcasts when I'm like dog walking and making like washing dishes. Like I could probably knock it out sooner than I think, even though I'm fairly close to finishing it. I might want to check out some of that because I listened to I was always kind of a little dismissive of, and these are like the things that you maybe like, these are like the pretentious dumb qualities you pick up in your life that you then shed as you get older. It's just like, there's a certain like badge you wear of pride of reading so-called difficult books. And like, I never was like throwing in people's faces. Like I've read like Joyce and I love fucking Beckett and all this stuff. It's just like, I like it. And then you feel this like inherent sense of worth or something, but it's just like, then there's, this mild, like years ago, I was like, audiobooks, fuck that. I'm not going to do that. Like, and I had the voice, frankly, of like my old boss at the bookstore I used to work for, who was like the funniest guy I ever met, but like kind of a curmudgeonly bookstore owner. And he used to refer to like people like that. He would just call them illiterates, because he was just a dick. But it was just like the idea of, because audiobooks were like on cassette at that time. And
they were.
I bought like Dylan Thomas reading his poems and reading Under Milkwood, which is amazing. And I remember like showing it to him and he was like very dismissive of the idea of like listening to even Dylan Thomas read his stuff. It's just like,
here's a funny story for you. The drive that I made from Durham, North Carolina to Normal, Illinois to interview with John for a job at Delkey. I listened to brief interviews of a hideous man on cassette tape in my car over that like 20-hour drive.
I love it. I listened to all of, there's some books that it's like I kind of feel like I want to read them and I want the stillness and the quiet of it. But like my wife is reading Blindness right now for a book club, Saramago, and she's also like, when she can't get to the book, she's listening to the audiobook of it. And it's just like, I was listening to it with her the other day and I'm like, it's compelling. It's a compelling listen. It's like, it's the same experience in a lot of ways.
It really is. It's like there's something about that that's interesting to me though, of like the sight aspect of it, the visualness of reading, both being like something that you feel value in the way, like what you're saying of like the sort of not pretentious, but the sort of like presentation of it. Like I've read Joyce, I read the whole thing. I have my notes. Like I like if anything, like I will pull out a book and I'll be like flip through and be like, look at all this crazy shit that I wrote. Like there'd be crazy shit. And I'll know that book was like important to me. And as I was running through it, now that I don't remember it's important, but like the level of those notes are like indicative of some experience, some aspect of that experience. And then when you listen to it, there is a different trigger that's going on, but at the same time, you're still forming the same thoughts and like visions. And it's still like the mechanism is the same, even if it's like emphasizing something else. The other thing I was going to tell you is, have I talked to you about Alyosha Cole? Okay, so this is wild. So there's a long story to how this came about that I'm not going to bother with, but we are going to be publishing this book by a writer named Alyosha Cole, who is friends with Javier Marias, Spanish writer, friends with Javier Marias. Marias wrote two short stories that involve, one of them is very much like just the bio of Alyosha Cole, under a different name. It's just a bio of him, like their friendship. And Alyosha Cole's bit was that he wanted to be a real writer. He wanted to write, and he thought that Finnegan's Wake was the first good book. And everything after that, you start there. Like you don't go back in time. You start with Finnegan's Wake, and then you advance, and whatever that means. And that term, the advancing, the next step, the like forward motion of things, of like the progression of aesthetics, is always like it doesn't really make sense, but like it is the metaphor that we use quite frequently of like what's after this? Like, what is and sometimes it could be like the pendulum swing back. But with him, he was like, I want to take Finnegan's Wake as like my text and do the next thing. And so he wrote and he told Javier Marias, like, he's like, well, I only have like a certain number of words and I'm going to kill myself. And when I'm done writing what I'm going to write, I'm going to kill myself. And Marias got like one of his books published while he was alive and nobody bought it because it was like, you know, fucking crazy.
Sure.
And he wrote this book called Attila. He wrote two things. One was his thesis for getting his medical doctorate, I believe. That was on pain. That's like on pain.
Jesus.
And it's like 100-page like on pain essay. And then he wrote this book called Attila, in which like I'm not sure how to describe it. I mean, essentially like it is Attila, but Attila's son is like Don Quixote, and it's got like plays in the beginning, and it's all wordplay in Spanish, and it's fucking like insane looking. And we're going to be publishing that theoretically next year, although I think it's going to be towards the end of next year because it's going to take a lot to like go
sure.
And it's one of these things that like I'm most excited about, and I'm talking to the translator because we know that it's an interpretation. Like Finnegan's Wake, to like translate Finnegan's Wake into a language, even to read it is one thing. To think about translating it into a language is a whole another world, right?
Yeah. When I read about people who've actually translated books like that, I'm just like, what the fuck? I mean, like the commitment. It seems way as challenging or as daunting a project as writing something like that as translating. I mean, it's just
absolutely, if not more, because you have to like answer questions about it.
Well, I was like, I said this to a group of people the other day. Like, I'm teaching a writing workshop, and we're reading. I'm inflicting elements of or exercises in style by Cuno on them next week. I can't wait to see what they do with that. Ooh, but well, it's not necessarily like in the wheelhouse of that group necessarily, but I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Because that's not a book that like a lot of even people I know who love Cuno don't really love that book for some reason.
Really?
I've met a lot of people who are like, they like what's the one on the train, Somebody on the Train, and they like a lot of like, and We Always Treat Women Too Well, and like a lot of those sort of books. But for some reason, like I told someone how much I love that book.
Like the worst book.
They didn't like it. I met like two people in my life who are like, oh, Exercises in Style is a cute little thing, but it's like they like dismissed it somehow. I think it's brilliant.
I mean, it is like in the sense of like that there's a readership of like what is going to happen next, and there's no what is going to happen next. It's like what is the next iteration? And sure, there's like however many. I was going to say 69 iterations. I know that's not right, but there are the number of iterations, and you could be like, okay, I get it. Like you're just going to do this thing. But what's interesting to me about that book too is that Barbara Wright invented huge numbers of those.
Yeah,
they're not in French.
No, I don't know. When I think of that book, though, I mean, I think that's one of the like the tension that I think a lot of people look for in a story, like what's going to happen next, is sort of like it manifests through how is he going to retell this next? Yeah. I mean, like there's a significant level of like excitement to get to the next chapter in my mind of that, but
I get that too, and like and seeing like the experiments that go on, like how can you play this game? Like it is an exercise, and exercises are fun in that way. But Barbara was before she passed away, I met her for dinner a few times, and she explained like that Kano would be like, hey, here's like this chapter, it's in like whatever Alexandrine, whatever, you know, one of those things. And she's like, well, that doesn't work in English at all. He's like, just make your own. She'd be like, okay, we'll use like this instead. It's like, sounds fine. And so like in English is like its own unique creation on top of like the creation of the book itself. The one that's really interesting that is along those lines too, but is like the one step further is the 100 million poems. You know what I'm talking about?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so he wrote 10 sonnets, and the 10 sonnets are in a book in which every line is cut so that you can, like those flip books where you have like the face and the body and the torso, and they're different for kids. So you can have like a duck body and like a bear and like a pig head or whatever. Yeah. And so with this, it was that every line, there are 10 poems that he wrote, they're 14 lines. So every one of those can be one of the 10 iterations. Oh. And if you flip it and they all fit the same rhyme scheme, they fit the same like syllable count. So no matter what you choose, it reads as a sonnet. but you get to choose which of the 10 for line 1, line 2, line 3, line 4, like that. So I think it's 100. I think it's 100 million is the number of different possibilities that exist.
Combinations that you could do with it.
And so like that is like the Exercises in Style to like the theoretical like end game of everything. Whereas Exercises in Style does have like some tension still of like, can you pull this off? Writing 10 sonnets is not, I mean, writing 10 sonnets that use the same rhyme scheme, the same thing. You're like, sure, that's difficult, but I don't know. Not the same as like everyone being like, let's do interrogation. Let's do this. Let's do this. Let's do this. I mean, it's fun. Going back to the Delkey thing, in a way, tying, because Cano is like a big Delkey author. Like there's Last Days, Odile. I remember one of the things that I learned from John in terms of editorial stuff was that he said he published Odile as like, I think that's the first Cano book they did. If it's not the first, it's the second. But they did it because he got in a sample of it, and the first paragraph is about a puddle. And he's like, this is the most amazing paragraph. So we're just publishing this author now. Doesn't matter what else comes. Whatever else comes will be good.
That reminds me of, it's funny because it suddenly made me think this is completely out of left field. But like, again, one of my friends, my sort of like mentor figure, this guy who ran the bookshop I worked for in the 90s, and became kind of like a buddy of mine for years after. Like he always said that the first page of Augie March, the Saul Bellow book, he's like, is brilliant. He goes, it absolutely falls to shit after page 1. He goes, but that is a brilliant first page. He goes, the book is fucking terrible, and I hate Saul Bellow. Most Chicagoans that I know hate Saul Bellow. But he's like, but he goes, but that first page is brilliant, and I can't take that away from him. And he's like, and so we had this conversation once about like, if you write a brilliant page of prose, and like, you know, that book is long, Adventures of Augie March, like, and everything else that follows is theoretically shit, even though I think a lot of people love that book, and I actually haven't read it, so I don't even know. But it's just like, does that, like, you know, does one page, like, is that enough? Like, is that enough to sort of cement your legacy?
I mean, there's two things that is so interesting. So the like with the Cano thing, like John had a sense for like, this is something special. Like this person, not all of their attempts are going to be perfect. Like their attempts are going to be noteworthy. And their writing is going to be worth paying attention to, worth having in public, worth having discussions, worth having it made available to readers, even if it's not 100% successful every single time, right?
Yeah.
And so the last book, so when we took over the press, there's 81 books that he had written down on a piece of paper on his desk that he had either signed on, somebody was translating, or there was an intent. It depends. It's all a little bit murky. Some of them were repeated, so there's probably like 76 because he just kept writing the same things over and over again, whatever. But like, he also at that point in time couldn't read. So
John couldn't read?
He couldn't edit. He could read, like, he'd have to blow things up. Like, he's like, I get migraines. Like, I have to like make like a huge font, and I can sort of read for like a couple of minutes, but he's like, I can't read him. I can't edit. I can't read any of this stuff. And so going into it, it's like, okay, that's cool. And yet, like, all the books I've worked on are like fucking amazing and are like great, like the sort of book that he would always want to do. And they're like great like that. Like somehow he's still new. He's still new. Like there's an editorial vision that I don't think that most people have. I don't think, looking through like the Twitterification of like publishing, editorial publishing, I don't think these people have visions. Like they're generally just like a job. And like I want to do things that check certain boxes, and that's fine. Like that's a part of this whole system. Like we need that. There's no dismissing that. But there is a difference when there's like some maverick sort of idea, maverick sort of character who's like, I get things based on these like intuitions of sorts. And I mean, that's the thing. Can I read you one paragraph of this fucking book?
Go for it.
Okay. Because this is going to be vulgar and fun. So this is one.
Go for it.
This is one that like I know that the author was a bit disappointed because like it didn't get attention. It also was never like edited or proofread. Right. So I read it with the intent of like of proofreading it and sort of editing it. So I have like a lot of editorial marks in here. But what I found was that this book, and this book that's forthcoming called Gentleman Callers by Corinne Hoax, is also another female voice that's like very strident and funny and aggressive and amazing. And John just picked these books up. He didn't know anything about them. Like, it's so weird. Like, he's so right. So here's the beginning paragraph. It takes a second, but just trust me.
Okay.
Of the short story called Nectar. Although he's a gynecologist, my husband tries to make out that he's an artist. And that's not the only thing about him that annoys me. Actually, I don't remember when he started getting on my nerves, but I can single this out as one of the most irritating things. When we have people over, he'll say that he's not, quote, a real artist, only, quote, a dabbler in art. But that's just him pretending to be modest. And we have people over all the time, which I really dread because it means loads of cooking and cleaning. My husband always insists on throwing a lavish banquet, to show that we're a so-called functional family. These lavish banquets are normally held in our living room, and the low table is seating for 4 others besides us. Since he always leaves everything to me, I'm usually stuck in the kitchen. When I finally get a chance to join the conversations, I have to sit on a stool. I always lie through my teeth and everyone says, "Hey, are you comfortable?" Meanwhile, my husband just blathers on, mainly about himself. And because it's rude to talk about pussies, the only subject about which he knows a thing or two, he goes on and on about his art, which is to say his oil paintings. He works on them in one of the rooms of our apartment, his studio. And this means our 2 boys, who are always bickering, are forced to share a single room. His paintings are amateurish, the colors blurred, dull, and depressing. Every time he makes a mistake, he slaps on a new coat of paint until they wind up looking like huge piles of vomit, like someone threw up after gorging themselves. He has the notion his paintings are abstract and that they, quote, render emotional states of anxiety and exultation. The truth is, they're just pictures of the things he knows best, pussies, from the inside and the outside. I assume that other people, at least the more intelligent ones, can see this too. I'm almost certain that they refer to him as the gynecologist who paints pussies behind his back. What's more, he totally deserves it. I wouldn't be the least bit upset if that were the case. Although to his face, they flatter him. "Hey, you're a real artist," they say to him, staring at the paintings as is standing before a canvas by Da Vinci. That's when he pulls out his well-worn phrase, "No, I just dabble in art."
Who is this again?
Story 2, like, this book is quote-unquote difficult in some ways because it doesn't really have like ending. It's just like one moment of a life. There's not a plot usually. There's just like a moment of someone's in interior monologue. And I wonder if there isn't a part of like things that are difficult being like the expectation of the Freytag's triangle, the sort of like expectation of like that sort of narrative versus the sort of like tonality of like books like that and writing like that.
No, it's definitely, I mean, I guess the question is who's setting this definition, because like I will consent to the idea that there are books that I have not finished. There are books that I would deem, whether I would say they're difficult or not. I'm kind of trying to shy away from that, but like they're just not, like I would just say I'm not responding to this book. It's like I try to always make it my thing, where it's just like it's not the book for me. People love it, and there's so many books that people love that I don't love, and there's so many books that like I don't like. I understand why people don't like that I love, and it's just like I just think it's very individual, and I think we should, as readers, kind of just take it on like. Humble ourselves to the idea of like, well, it's just not responding with me, or I'm not responding to it. But the idea of like when you read Goodreads reviews, which are like the fucking worst, they're worse than Amazon reviews. You like so many of the reviews. What's that?
Jeremy Garber's Goodreads reviews are top.
Oh wow, they're probably like because they're probably hilarious in artistry or something.
They're smart, but there's also this woman Karen I'll tell you about in a second, who's a good reviewer.
Well, like the Goodreads reviewers that I'm taking to task are kind of like, okay, so there's a book called Eggshells by Katrina Lally, who's an Irish writer, and Melville House put that book out. And I love that book. I think it's a fine, like incredibly readable book, and the audiobook is even better. And it's just a fun book from a writer who's somewhere, like the narrator is on the spectrum. It's like that kind of book.
Yeah.
And like there's a lot of lists as a result of that, but I find it to be like fucking hilarious. And when I went to like Amazon or Goodreads and read the reviews, because I was just curious to see what other people thought, they were all just like, it's just not a normal book. And that's sort of like the most depressing thing that I would see. It's just like, I mean, I love, like there's some joy that I get, like some childhood joy of reading a book that's like a mystery novel or a spy novel that's got like a clearly orchestrated plot. And I love all that too. But at the same time, like there's room for everything. And I think it's just really kind of like, what I think the problem is that like the acceptable, digestible kind of plot is like its hegemony. It's just like it's taken over to the point where anything that strays from that gets this kind of like like hair shirt put upon it of like you are difficult and it's a chore and so forth. And some things are a chore, but some things are like a lovely, pleasant chore, if I guess is maybe the way I think about it.
There was a class that David Foster Wallace taught at Illinois State when I was there that was only books that he never finished. That he set aside. And one of the first ones was like Omen Setter's Luck by William Gass. He's like, I couldn't finish this. And so we're going to read it in this class. And like, I'm tempted all the time. Every year when I go to do my syllabus for my World Lit class, to just be like, what are the 6 books that I just never finished reading? Because they were like,
what are the 6 books you never finished reading?
They'd have to be in translation because it's world literature. I'm not qualified to teach English books, by the way. Like, I'm just not. I don't have that.
You're only a translation.
I'm only allowed to teach translations, even though I can't even fucking translate.
I was gonna say, do you have any second language skills that I know of?
I can get through with Spanish like for a bit. Like, I can't read the books that we publish in their original for the most part because they're, I don't know the verb tenses, the
nuances.
Language. That's too much for me.
Yeah.
Like, I want to publish. I mean, even in English, I want to publish people who are smarter than I am. And in Spanish, that's like a pretty low bar to cross. And those people, like, there's a lot that are like that. Yeah. But I can read like reviews or like emails, like that kind of shit.
Sure. Okay.
And I think like inadvertently, I helped translate the Crack Manifesto back when writers were important, because we had gotten like a fake translation of it for Context, the magazine that Delkey put out. There's like a tabloid that went to professors and to bookstores, and it was something was wrong. I forget what the deal was at this moment in time, but I think it was like a student just like translated it, and I rewrote it. So I like essentially edited it, but I would look at like the Spanish and be like, oh wait, I think that this is there. And so like this Crack Manifesto that exists in English has my fingerprints throughout it as like a quote-unquote translator.
Pretty sure I read that, because there was a time, this is again going back to like early 21st century, where the Crack Manifesto from the Latin American writers was kind of like a big thing. And it's like, that was a period where I was reading nothing. Like there was 8 years maybe where I read nothing but Latin American lit. Largely, there it is. There you go. Nice. Largely because I met my wife, who at the time I was dating, and she's, introduced me to a lot of writers. Like she introduced me to Juan Rulfo, which was like game-changing shit when you read that fucking book, Pedro Páramo. It's like, that's fucking, like, you're going to the root of like the whole magic realism thing that like I didn't really love, because I never really loved Garcia Marquez. And to this day, I kind of think fuck Garcia Marquez, but I do think Hundred Years of Solitude's a great book. But like at the same time, like we're discovering that there was writers who were not in that, like the Latin American boom of the 60s and 70s, where like all these writers were getting published who were like him, and realizing that there was like so much more interesting stuff going on. Like I just ate it all up. And that's around the time, I think, when I was reading that is when the Crack Manifesto, that generation was coming out. Which, includes a lot of people that I think we've already talked about, but it's just like,
they're really interesting.
What's that?
They're really interesting. I mean, there's like 7, 8 of them. Cristina Rivera Garza got signed into the crack group during a Guadalajara book fair dinner that I was at. She signed a napkin to join their group officially during that period. The group the manifesto thing is always been interesting to me as like a marketing strategy. And it's something that like Dogma 95 was around the same time.
Yeah.
Like there is that, like, we want to tell you what our aesthetic's going to be, and then we're going to do whatever. And you should
break all those rules though.
Yeah. And we'll break all those rules. We'll do what we need to do. But like the unfortunately, like the crack writers, aside from Eli Ros and Jorge Volpe to a much lesser extent, like generally didn't get a lot of translations into English and a lot of attention. Cristina,
those are the two I've read.
Like no one would think of her as a crack writer. She's just a writer. Like she's a great writer. Like it doesn't associate with the group, so it doesn't carry the group in that sense. And the main one that got the most attention was Nacho Padilla, and he died. He got hit by a car changing his tire after he had a flat tire.
Yep.
I'm going to say something really wild now. Let me take this shot.
All right, take it.
This is drinking and talking.
Get some liquid courage, go.
This is the hardest book to read.
No, I will not debate you on that. I haven't finished it.
And the reason why, so if you're listening to this, I held up Charles Dickens's Bleak House. And the problem isn't that it's long. The problem isn't that it's like complicated language. The problem is that it is slow, and that the difficulty when we judge difficulty or challenge within any piece of art is that the information flow doesn't match what we're used to. So I'm used to getting information constantly, like most people are. Like we can go on Twitter. If I get bored for a second, I go on Instagram and just flip through pictures. I don't get fucking anything out of that. But I'm literally like, well, that will kill like 12 seconds. Yeah. I can like reset. I just need a jolt of knowledge, a jolt of information, jolts of information coming. And these books from this period of time are so motherfucking slow. There was I remember reading an article once about how with subliminal advertising, like when it came out in the 60s and they're like, buy popcorn, get a Coke, whatever. Right. And I know that all that's like not really real. Like it's sort of, that's not actually what happened. But nevertheless, like once they had subliminal advertisements in movies, like within 15 years, if you watch those movies, they weren't subliminal. They're just like, well, there's an ad for a Coke. Yeah. And like the speed at which we pick up information has changed so dramatically that like, you could think of it in one way of like the process of that, but then think about Finnegan's Wake. Finnegan's Wake is incredibly fulfilling because it has so many modes of communication of information that are coming at you.
Every fucking word, every line is just a joke.
And that feels good.
Yeah. I think I have the same thing. Like one of my friends is a Victorian scholar, and she's one of the professors at Roosevelt, and she wrote a book which is really great, called Crime in Victorian Verse, I think, or Crime in Verse. It's about Victorian lit. And it's mostly looking at like Rossetti and people like that. It's just like it's really like things that I think are a little bit more accessible and fun, and sort of like she's a Victorianist, like that was her focus in grad school, but it's not like what I think of her as. Like we talk mostly about, like she reads like a lot. She's one who really kind of instilled in me as an undergrad, like my love of international lit, because like I took a class of hers called Imagining Terror, and we read like Rushdie, and we read like books like writers from Africa, like we read like Ngugi Thiago, and like writers I never would have experienced. You don't see on a syllabus in most colleges. No. But it's like when I would ask her about Victorian lit, I'm like, the thing is, like I always associate it with Dickens, and I fucking don't love Dickens. And I think it's kind of what you're talking about. I think it's a different mindset going into that book, and people love it for that reason. And it's just like, I mean, I've read Tale of Two Cities, which I think is amazing, but both Bleak House and Great Expectations, I can't finish those books. I just cannot fucking do it.
I'm determined this year, I'm going to get the audiobook and listen to Bleak House.
Have fun, because you're on your own there. But I don't know if it's always the age though, because you're right. Maybe it's something about that era, but I'm going to hold up another so-called difficult book, which predates everything we've talked about. Like Finnegan's Wake is, 1939, I want to say, and 36 was it?
Isn't it? Yeah, 36. The Making of Americans comes out the same year, I believe.
You're right. Yeah.
And I'm thinking Birds.
I'm thinking of Women Two Birds, which is a great book by Flann O'Brien, who's one of my heroes. I always joke when I make the sign of the cross. Yeah, which is, of course, it didn't sell because it got bombed by Hitler.
Oh, so yeah, no shit. So the segue that I tried to plant at the beginning and didn't quite make. I'm going to Dublin, not for work specifically, but I'm going to go film one of the Mining the Dalkey Archive substacks about Dalkey.
About Dalkey, like the town itself, the suburb of Dublin.
The press is named after is the Dalkey Archive, based in Dalkey, written by Flann O'Brien, about like James Joyce working in a hotel and going under the sea to talk to St. Augustine. Like there's like, I want to film that in every way. I've never been there.
I was in Dublin a couple of years ago, and I really wanted to go to the like the tower that's the beginning of Ulysses, which is a James Joyce kind of like museum, and like you can just go to Dalkey.
Something like that, yeah.
But I didn't go. Dalkey Archive, the book itself, is like my least favorite Flann O'Brien book, but it's still like my least favorite Flann O'Brien book is still. When I make the Sign of the Cross, I go in the name of Joyce, Beckett, and Flann O'Brien. It's just like the fucking three towers of Irish literature. And that book is like, even if it's not my favorite Flann O'Brien book, like that's the one that I think I first read. And then I'm like, this is interesting, and I like it, and it's cute because Joyce is a character in it. But like when I read it, Swim with Two Birds, like that's when all the bets were off. And I think you're doing a reissue of that from Dalkey, I heard.
Yeah. Because we don't have many copies. So it's been scanned in. I have
I've got 5.
If anyone listening is curious about Delkey books, I had a bunch of things scanned by a company. I have on my computer like all these like clean PDFs and Word files of like Miss Macintosh, My Darling, Making Americans, That Swim Two Birds. Like all these are sitting on my computer waiting to get printed once we can figure out how to like what the best way of printing that is. Should it be relayed out? Should we just use the PDF and throw a cover on? Do we need to change these things? They're all sitting here now on my computer. There's one, Natalie Thoreau's The Planetarium is one that needs to be in there, but I had to buy a copy because I couldn't find it. That was a book that I reprinted that I was like, I love her. She's like she's my favorite Nouveau Roman writer. I actually don't like most of the Nouveau Roman writers. Like I don't like Claude Ollier. I don't like, I don't care for like, I like Robbe-Grillet, but I don't like most of the others. I like Robbe-Grillet and Thoreau, and everyone else I think is like a little arid and a little like, it's difficult in a different way. It's like difficult in the sense of like, I don't really want to inhabit this writer's mind.
Yeah, like I think difficulty is usually associated with length, which is something I want to talk about. And these are not long things, but they're not fun things. Like,
yeah.
Like exactly. Is how I would put it. But well, I mean, like since we're on this subject,
Robert Penge is like one of my favorites. I think like The Interrogation is one of the funniest books I've ever read in my life. The Interrogation is literally like 500 pages, so it's long. It fits exactly what you're talking about of being difficult because it's like 1,000,000 pages long, and it's like you don't get to see the questions. You only see the answers from someone who's a servant at this house on this weekend when something happened. And they're like, what happened? And he's like, well, this room has like this painting over here and this painting over here and this thing over here and there's a door over here and here's how it is. And they're like, and then like the next part they're like, oh, you want to know about who is there? Oh, like there was this dog and there's this cat and there's this squirrel and there's these things and these things are like, oh, the people in the house. Yeah, there was like someone stayed in one of the bedrooms. We have like 26 bedrooms. Let me tell you about each of the bedrooms. And it's like this funny, like endless delay. Like it's just based in delay. And, like, things that are based in delay also are going to seem challenging because they don't have the fulfillment that you're looking for.
But I think if there's anything that like I'm discovering, and I knew this already, but like it's like length is fine if it's like Finnegan's Wake, I said, is funny. It's a funny fucking book. Ulysses is funny. Like Joyce is just hilarious to me. And, Faulkner can be funny. Like so-called difficult writers can be funny. And like the book that I immediately grabbed because I saw, and I'm like, well, I know you did this for a 2-month review. And I know this is like maybe one of the funniest books I've read in years. And it's one of the longest books I've read is Ducks Newburyport.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, like, it's fucking hysterical. Like every page, it's an unbroken paragraph, kind of. Or unbroken sentence, kind of, even though it's frankly like several sentences just separate with commas instead of periods. But it's just like that is not really like that. I remember when I told someone that I wanted to read that book, like I kept telling everyone, I'm like, I really want to read this book. It sounds really interesting. It sounds really fun. It's getting like really interesting reviews. And, it doesn't sound like, like I've read Finnegan's Wake. Fuck it. I could read anything. It was my sort of like balls that I had at the moment. Yeah. And I remember like, 3 of my friends, one of them said, I don't like to inhabit anyone's mind for that long, was the first comment, which I thought, but if it's a brilliant mind.
Then, buddy. Like,
yeah.
I hate myself for that reason. Like, I know I'm stuck.
Well, give me a 1,000-page book that's really good.
Give me 1,000 pages that's not me. Fuck you. God, thank you. That's like a God, thank you.
But the other comment was, it just sounds exhausting. But I'm like, it does if you plan to do nothing but just sit down and read this for like, I don't know, maybe like take it on the train with you and read it. Like it's a different reading experience. And I think we think reading needs to be like as digestible as like a Netflix stream. It's just as binging. It's just like, if you think of reading as I need to consume this thing in a speedy way or in a certain way that I'm used to consuming like anything I can download, then maybe I think that's what keeps people from approaching these. But like I said, I read Finnegan's Wake 13 pages a week. And that's my Sunday night. And you said you would just like, read it on your Tuesday night. It's like Ducks Newburyport, I found to be a lot more readable than any of the books we've talked about. Like it's one of the most readable books I've ever read in my life. And, Thomas Flynn, like, your buddy, like Tom, when I was talking, like when I asked him.
Not talk to me anymore, so he's not my buddy.
Oh, he won't talk to you? What did you do to piss off Tom?
I took a shit on Mandy Medley.
That's what it was.
Like not a physical shit, but like a Twitter shit.
Well, you've pissed off
She
Tom.
fired, they cut him out of the business and then bragged about them being like the socialist for the workers bookstore. And I was like, well, that's not true.
I assumed he stepped down. I didn't know, but no. Shame on you, Pilsen.
I've got a lot more whiskey if you guys want a lot more stories.
See, this is good for the locals because Pilsen community is like, I mean, that was the whole reason I started going there was because of Tom. But, ooh, here we go. Okay, some shit talking, some Chicago book.
I'm blocked from their Twitter.
Wow, you really shit on him that hard, huh? I didn't know they cut him out. I thought it was like an amicable, like, my assumption was COVID hit and then he realized he couldn't be in the he couldn't like maintain the business. I didn't know. I just
assumed what happened was that he I'm sorry, Tom. I'm sorry, whomever hates me for this, but the way that it was described was that Tom was like stuck at home with his kids during COVID. They had a plan for the bookstore that involved like re-energizing their back. Like the store had been doing well through like used book sales and to slowly bring in new books. Instead, they decided to just do all new books once COVID hit. And then there was a meeting that was called in which they were going to deal with like what's going on with COVID. And Tom signed on and they're like, we've had a conversation without you. And we can only afford to have 2 people who work here. And you're the one that's out because your wife has a job. And we don't have partners that have jobs that are, so you are the one that we need to cut out.
Fuck, I had no idea.
And then when I stood up for him, he was like, I'm never talking to you again for being mean to these people. And all I had said was something like unattributed, being like, I love that bookstores use slogans to like represent their selves, but they don't actually believe them.
Bookstore, I mean, so we're going off on an interesting tangent, but as you know, you work
a lot of issues with independent bookstores.
You worked at a bookstore in Ann Arbor, right? And I worked in.
No, I worked in not Ann Arbor would have been cool. No, Grand Rapids and Durham. Grand Rapids and Raleigh.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. I lived in Durham. I worked in Raleigh.
Okay. So really, North Carolina?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to go to Duke for graduate school and study with Ariel Dorfman, who I published.
Yeah, great. Yeah, Ariel Dorfman. Yeah, wonderful. That's in the Maid. And yeah. No, I say that because like
this fucking shit. Instead I went down this fucking path. Instead I was like, oh well, you could do that. That would be like wealthy and fun and like and I was like, no, you know what I want to do? You know what I want to do? I want to be fucking poor and bald and like unhappy and like liquored up and like just grumpy at agents because like none of this is fair. The creation of art is not an industry that makes fucking any fucking sense. If you're an artist,
you brought this into the English speaking world.
Yeah.
Actually, I did. I'm not. I'm not holding up the big book of open letters. Like, I know we've talked about this a lot in the past, but like the one book that Open Letter put out that like cemented me with the press, like I'm going to follow you no matter what, because I read this. It's one of the first you put out in my mind was Villainous Poker.
Oh yeah.
Like I know you don't have the rights to it anymore.
Books, and that's one of them. Alejandro Zambra is the other one.
Well, Villainous Poker, I know that like, you told me about that whole like clusterfuck of a story, but like when I picked up that book, which is a bit, speaking of difficult books, it's not a forgiving book in a lot of ways. But like that's one of like I would like there's maybe about 10 to 20 books that I would say like are books where when I finished reading the last page, I was like silent for hours. Like I can't talk. I just got to think about what I just fucking experienced. And that may be one of them because I just think it's a really intense book.
What's super funny about Villainous Poker is that book. So there are people that I know. I know people in like various ways, but there's a huge group of people I know who know like a few things about me that are like unchanging. One of them is I hate the word gays. I hate the word gays in books 100%. Like it's never appropriate. Like it's always used for look.
Wait. As in like GAZE, like someone's gaze?
Yeah.
The male gaze?
Yeah, the male gaze. The male gaze would be fine, but usually it's like in French books, they're like, I'm gazing out the window at like and like, hey, you're just looking out the window, motherfucker. Like, don't be like, Don't fucking tell me you're fucking gazing. You're not fucking gazing. You're looking out the window. That's bullshit.
But they're like putting on airs by saying gaze.
It's only in translation. Like, people don't generally write the word gaze in a normal written thing, but in translation, it's like, oh no, I'm looking with purpose. But it's not like look. That's not what gaze means to me. Gaze to me means like it's a little bit more philosophical. It's a little bit more like judgmental. It's a little bit more like in it. Like, there's more to it. You don't use that word lightly. And when it's used lightly, I don't think that that's a real writer. I think that's a writer that's just like, or a translator who's just like, gaze is a cool word, man. Like, so is like enigmatic. I found, so my car got towed the other day, and because I'm a fucking moron, and I parked in front of the church's driveway. Like, I just blocked their driveway with my car. But there was like, to be on my side, there was like a bunch of snow. I couldn't tell where it was. I parked in front of their driveway. They towed my car, and I had to find my title to get my car back. And so I was going through all these papers, and I found like every poem I wrote as a high school and college student. And I had the biggest boner for the word enigmatic that anyone's ever had. Like, every single poem used enigmatic at least once.
Wait, so you wrote poems? Because I find that funny for your past scorn for poetry that you've expressed to me personally.
That was like 30 years ago.
Is that sort of like, I know you have a poetry editor at Open Letter, and I know you've put out some great stuff, and like one of which is being like Sonnets to Orpheus, the real like translation, which is
catcalling. The next book is the best.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah. So Anastasia and Nicholas took over as our poetry editor after Sonnets for Orpheus, which is fine and is interesting, and was one of these like COVID casualty cases where we had produced a book that was like a gift book. Yeah, that you see on the counter of a store and you pick up and buy because it's like a hardcover. Yeah. Well, yeah,
but it's a good translation. I mean, that's like Rilke is one of the, like, most of the like translation literature, since we're on this subject, like poetry and translation is not awesome. Like, it's just my thing. Like, I think like most of my favorite writers who are writers in translation that I've read, you know, like a lot of Latin Americans and Russians and people like that I really love, like that shit just works. Poetry and translation kind of sucks. Like, and even when it's side by side, and I've read a lot of like Latin American literature and a lot of Latin American poets, like Vicente Huidobro from Chile, who's fucking amazing. But it's like, when you read it side by side, and the very like bad busted up Spanish that I possess, I'm able to see, like, I've compared translations and looked at it. Like, if you want to geek out about that, you can. Like, Cesar Vallejo is another one. Like, people like that is amazing. But like most poetry I get in translation, I just don't love. And I think it's always attributed, it's probably something in the translation. But like Rilke is one of those people who are, like, everyone loves, and you know, I studied poetry, and I'm like, I love poetry, but like I never really glommed on to Rilke. And I think, and I looked at that translation, and I thought, like, maybe that's the issue, because I did like that edition you put out, and I thought maybe it's just that I'm reading like kind of older translators who are like too concerned with like being so loyal to the poem that they were reading that they were making a shitty poem in English. That's sort of what I thought. But I do know that like poetry is something that it's another fucking beast altogether.
I mean, it's interesting to put poetry in contrast to difficult literature. I don't understand poetry at all. Like, I don't read it for the reason that, like, I read fast. Like, I read fast. I read too fast.
You read faster than I do. You read faster than I ever could.
I have to, because I fucking have. If I don't read fucking 125 pages a night, like, the whole world stops moving. Like, Open Letter and we don't publish books if I don't read 125 pages a night. And like,
you've got the world, you've got the weight of Atlas.
I allocate. It's literally that, and 28 pages of that is fun, and the rest of it is like work. So like, I had, like, before I talked to you, I had a call with a guy that I'm editing his manuscript for Delkey that was turned in 3 years ago and hasn't been touched, and I'm trying to like go through that, and I have to finish that next week, or else like his book won't come out on time.
Yeah, I mean, poetry, like, right around
poetry's impossible.
Well, the last time we talked for the podcast was like 2016 or so, and that was like when I spent a year
drunk now.
So I spent like so much time deeply immersed in poetry, because like I get in phases where like I'll read a thing and I'll lock into it. And right now I'm reading a lot of novels, and that's back where I am. Like my head is not in poetry. Like
No.
people will like send me things and I'm like, it's good, but it's just like I look at the broken lines and I'm just like, fuck, I can't do it. But like, well, I'm thinking about this chat and I pulled out like the most difficult poet I can think of, which is another great Irish poet called Maeve McGuckian. Now, if you've not read Maeve McGuckian, like look how slim this book is. This is a tiny little book, and this is selected poems. It's from Wake Forest, which is Wake Forest puts out Irish poetry. It's like Wake Forest is one of my like 10 favorite American publishers. Do you know them?
I mean, I know Wake Forest as a college.
Yeah, it's Wake Forest University Press.
Yeah,
and they almost what's that?
Chris Paul, the basketball player, went to
exactly Wake Forest. Yeah, you know the school, North Carolina, and but they almost exclusively publish.
Yeah.
So you know it through sports. I know it through poetry. That sort of like speaks to who we are. But like it's one of the most like renowned presses for poetry that I'll pick up because it's almost always from Irish poetry. And I've always said like Ireland produces like poets the way the Dominican Republic produces baseball players. It's just like in the fucking water and in the soil. But it's like everything I was reading in preparation for this is like, this is way harder than anything in fucking Maidenhair. You know, it's like for all of my like talking about how hard that book was for me to finish, like 2 verses, like these 2 verses on the page that I don't expect to read are way more fucking cumbersome than anything I could find in Maidenhair. As like difficult a book as I would qualify that as.
That's really interesting. So I think that you should give a reading of that, of what you find difficult, and then I will read a bit of this.
What is that? I can't see.
This Macintosh, My Darling, which is a book I've not read. It's 1,600 pages long. It's like apparently amazing, but I've never read it.
Okay. I'm game. I'll give you 1 2-verse poem.
I'm going to mute you and use the bathroom. I mean, and use the bathroom.
Go use the bathroom while I read 1 poem from Maeve McGuckian. So this is for whomever's still around. This is, for the record, now that Chad's gone, I could say Maeve McGuckian's the shit. If you like poetry, fucking Maeve McGuckian is like one of the poets you should be putting on your goddamn list of people to read if you haven't read her already. So like I definitely geek out about Irish poetry, and Kieran Carson is my hero. Rest in peace, died a couple of years ago. Paul Muldoon, who's still around and teaches at Princeton, is fucking amazing, of course, and everyone knows who Seamus Heaney is, fucking famous Seamus, and he's great. And there's no other end of other people, Matthew Sweeney and Leontia Flynn, who's fucking amazing, who you should all read. But McGuckian was one of the poets I read in undergrad, and I wrote a paper on her poem for a class called Irish Women Writers, where we read like Edna O'Brien and a bunch of like more famous people than McGuckian. And I fucking like wrote a paper knowing I could not do justice to these poems. I could not explain them, which is kind of what like college makes you do. It makes you explain poetry, and I could not do it. So tell me, this is one of the poems I quoted. Tell me, how do you explain this? This is called From the Dressing Room. Left to itself, they say, every fetus would turn female, staving in nature, siding with the enemy that delicately mixes up genders. This is an absence I have passionately sought, brightening nevertheless my poet's attic with the steady hands, calling him my blue lizard till his moans might be heard at the far end of the garden, for I like his ways. He's light on his feet and does not break anything, puts his entire soul into bringing me a glass of water. I can take anything now, even his being away, for it always seems to me his writing is for me, as I walk springless from the dressing room in a sisterly length of flesh-colored silk. Oh, there are moments when you think you can give notice in a jolly, wifely tone, tossing off a very last and sunsetty letter of farewell, with strict injunctions to be careful to procure his own lodgings, that my good little room is lockable, but shivery, I recover at the mere sight of him propping up my pillow. I mean, what the fuck? You know, like I wrote a paper on that and I got an A-. And when I read that paper, the funniest thing is my professor said, you bit off more than anyone could chew writing a paper on Maeve McGuckian. Like, she's inscrutable. And like the funny thing about it is just like she's like not apologetic about that. And it's like the kind of thing that keeps people from reading poetry is the sort of unscrutable, sort of otherworldly quality to it. And I think there was a moment in my life where I like really, really responded to that. And I'm not in one of those moments now, but at the same time, like I went to grad school to study creative writing poetry because I thought I like the way I write prose, if I can be a little cocky, and I think I can pull that off even if I'm bullshitting, but I don't like the way I write poetry, and I want to flex that muscle, and I want to like have, like, if you're going to get an education as a writer, study poetry because it's fucking discipline and it's different and it's a whole other thing. And I don't write poetry these much anymore. I'm writing prose, but it's just like, it's informed everything I do. Is that sort of like weirdness and that like liberation of, you can do whatever you want. You can do things that are different.
I have a question for you. How much
Sure.
is difficulty tied to individual perception? So I remember this, I'll tie this together in a weird way. So I remember John O'Brien from Delkey talking about teaching a class on William Carlos Williams. And what he did was he would read William Carlos Williams aloud to his class until he got to a point where he didn't understand what was going on. And would be like, what is this? And like, there's one thing where he was like, there's a description that's something like a pen, red notebook, red thing. It was like all these things. And he's like, I don't know what's going on here. And someone's like, oh, he's just describing what he's seeing. And I always, that always stuck with me as like poetics and like experimental strange literature is generally like tied to like your or the creator's very specific vision of what the world is that they're describing. And like poetry really exemplify, or it doesn't yeah, I'm drunk now. It doesn't exemplify that, but it does represent that very clearly. Like it is very unique to that mindset. And like it doesn't make sense a lot of times. It's inscrutable because it's like, well, I don't know how to get into that space, that headspace. It could be 4 different things. Like I don't really know what the headspace is. And prose negates that by having so many words that surround it.
No, I think there's something to that. Like the thing with poetry that I say to people, and I'm kind of like, just like I would brag about having read Finnegan's Wake or like so-called difficult books, like I think people who read poetry and write poetry and are poetry like followers can sometimes do the disservice to poetry by sort of making an insulated community of people who get it. And I find that kind of obnoxious, and I've always found that kind of obnoxious. Like, again, to sort of answer your question with a quick anecdote, like when I was in grad school and I was studying creative writing poetry, like one of the fellow poets invited me to a dinner party, and like I was friends with all the creative writing students who were like, we had to take a cross genre class, or like if you were a poet, you had to take a prose class. If you were a prose writer and a fiction writer, you had to take a poetry class. And I was friends with everybody. And I remember being like, can I bring this person? They're like, no, it's poets only because we have to stick together. It's like, that's the most bullshit attitude I've ever heard. And poets do themselves the biggest disservice by making themselves seem less approachable and less accessible than it really is. Like, it's just, you find your people and you lock in. Like, I just read a Mae McGuckian poem. That's fairly difficult. But like, my hero from the same region is Kieran Carson, who I think is the most readable poet I've ever read. And it's just like, if you can't like read a Kieran Carson poem, like his big book is Belfast Confetti, which is one of my 10 favorite books. And it's like, if you can't read that and figure out what's going on, like, you know, it's the same thing with like, you know, you're just not paying attention, or you're not doing the little bit of work that's asked of you. And I think sometimes that's the case, but there are poets who really, I think, go out of their way to make it inscrutable and make it sort of, I guess, otherworldly. They're so individualistic that it alienates readers. And I get that. I think I really get that. And there's a lot of poets that people I know celebrate that I do not love. And I think part of my issue is it's just whatever world they're inhabiting and they're expressing, I don't care. I think it's really about like, I don't think that a writer has an obligation to always like, you know, consider the audience and make it accessible for every reader. But at the same time, poets sometimes go out of their way, I feel like, to make it inaccessible to a lot of readers. Like, I mean, you're reading fucking, like, here's another book that's really hard that I read. It was Gravity's Rainbow. You're a Pynchon fanatic, right? I mean, you love Pynchon.
Yeah, no, that book doesn't seem hard to me at all.
Yeah, but I mean, like, it's one of the, like, did you see the movie Knives Out, by the way?
Yeah.
There's a joke in there about Gravity's Rainbow where like, like they say Gravity's Rainbow, and then you know, what's his face says like, nobody's read that book. And it's like when I saw that in the movie, my wife looked at me and laughed because she knew I read it. But I'm like, you've read it, I've read it. It's just like people have read it, but it has this like reputation. But I don't feel that's an unreadable book. Whereas I think like the reputation of it being unreadable keeps people from trying. And I think it's the same thing with poetry. It's just like the reputation of it is what stops people.
What's that book is the funniest fucking book I've ever read. I read that book. I read Crying Lot 49 in college and was like, oh, this is my shit. This is my jam. And that's part of it too, is that difficulty is monolithic in the sense of like, or hegemonic in the way that we talk about like that's difficult because it's long, it's weird, whatever. But like my difficult things for me are like Jonathan Franzen books. That's difficult for me to read. Reading Gravity's Rainbow is not difficult for me to read. I don't think of that as a difficult book. I think of it as a book that's like an enjoyment that I just fall into over and over again. I listened to Against the Day right up through the apocalypse or whatever the fuck we call this shit that's happened. Like I finished listening to that in Amsterdam before I came home last March, like as an audiobook and reading it. Like I have like the ebook and the audiobook and they sync and I read part and I listen to part and I would go back and forth. And like that book, I think is, I mean, a great Pynchon book in the sense that like it has like hope. It has like an idea of the world. It has like it understands how mechanisms and how like systems work in various ways that are bad towards like the individual and are better for a company. It upends them. There's like a lot of really fun things in that book. It's super long. It's super weird. I don't understand all the math and I don't care. Like I listened to it over like a 6-month period as an audiobook and reading it and like just sort of like hung out with Pynchon's characters. And I'd be like, I don't remember who this is. And I'd look it up and be like, oh yeah, that's right. It's that character. It's like blank, the person who's like blank. But I think that that's fun. I think that there is a fun that can be had in engaging with art that's, I think is undervalued right now. Like we generally is a terrible way to start this phrase. What I want to say,
too late, you're in it.
Human being right now is that when people talk about what they like or dislike, they tend to capsulate it as like everyone liking a thing or disliking a thing. But really it's very individualized. And like it should be individualized. Each of us should have our individual things that we like or dislike and like for a particular reason or have a particular reason for liking them. Like Pynchon speaks to me, doesn't speak to
a lot of people.
A lot of people.
Oh, really? Yeah.
I don't know. I'm making that up. I don't really know, but I'm just using that I'm using her as a trope.
Using your wife as an example.
So like, for example, this is a weird example, but I'm going to hold on.
Take a shot, take a drink. There you go.
So have you read London Fields by Martin Amis?
Martin Amis, of course. Yeah, great stuff.
It's a great book, right?
That's a great book, yeah.
Yeah, it's one of like the best books. Like it's super interesting. The setup is like a guy who has writer's block, goes to London, Airbnbs like this famous writer's apartment, gets involved with like this woman who like throws her diary away where she like is like, in my diary, she's like, I'm gonna get murdered. I'm a murderee. Like I'm not a vixen, I'm not a whore, I'm not a virgin, I'm not these things. I don't fit these categories. I am someone that should be murdered. Like I will invoke that feeling among males. Like I invoke that. And like then it just like trails out that bit of like, well, how do you lead these two men? One of whom is like, Keith, darts,
darts, yeah,
darts. Drink lager because it's cagged.
That was the most British book I've ever read.
All the most voices, and there's someone who's like Guy Clinch,
yeah.
And Keith Talent. Are you really seriously like that's a Pynchon joke?
Yeah, the names,
right?
Yeah.
So there's a movie of it. Do you know about the movie?
There's a movie of London Fields?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Know when it came out?
No, I have no idea about this.
2018. It came out in 2018, and it stars Amber Heard and Johnny Depp.
No,
and Billy Bob Thornton. It was filmed. Yeah, Billy Bob Thornton is the writer.
Really?
And this movie received a 0 rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and yet I watched it and I had to explain. I explained to Kai, I explained to like Chloe, I explained to everyone who was in the room, like what this thing was, what the movie was about, like what the book was. And we started watching it and everyone was like, this is kind of great. Like, it's kind of great. Like there's a trendiness to dislike and a trendiness to like it's very easy to categorize things as challenging, difficult, dismissible. And I don't know that ever makes any sense. Like would you ever what is a book that you would say like this is this sucks because it's too hard?
I don't know that I would have said like this is my thing is I think okay, so I'm
just blended two things together because I'm drunk.
No, not at all. Like I'll back up to my like humble background of being, I am a kid from the southwest burbs of Chicago who working class, middle class, like most of my family, smart people, but professionals. But like when I was in school, I went to a Catholic high school, all boys, had to wear fucking ties all day. And I was a remedial track kid. I mean, I was like a C student in high school. I sucked. And, when you're that and you're getting ready to go to college, and this is, 1989, I graduated high school. So it's just like this thing where it's just like, you're going to go to college and there's clearly like, there's three kinds of people at your school. There's valedictorian fucking smart kids, jocks, and I was a fat fucking loser who was into metal. So I wasn't either of those two things. You're in the middle, you're the weirdo. So like the guidance counselor, when I met with him in my senior year, it's just like, are you thinking of going to college? I'm like, And then she's like, go to the community college and they'll sort you out. And I did. And I went to community college because I was a dumb kid. And when I went there, like I met English teachers, and that's where I decided I think I like reading books. It wasn't until about then, but it's like you always have this thing in your head where it's just like, you don't belong. You're like, I work in fucking higher education, and every time I'm there, it's the imposter syndrome thing where it's just like, you don't belong, you know what you're doing. So it's just like anything like that, you have this like hanging over you of like, this is intimidating serious art and you don't get it. It's because you're a fucking idiot. And like
I have a nightmare that situation that's going on right now, and I know that no one that's involved in this situation will listen to this point of this podcast. So no matter how you can cut this up into like 17 sections, you'll never get these people listen. And so I was asked in 2018 to write an article for a Cambridge anthology about translation, the publisher's point of view.
Yay.
5,000 words, whatever it is. I wrote an article in February of 2019 that was related to the numbers, like it's related to the idea of numbers, because everyone had numbers. Numbers are very important, like in that moment in time. Like they still are. Like how many people have been vaccinated? It's like millions percentage. We're very much into percentages and numbers. Always.
That's how we understand the world. Yeah.
And as someone who's like a baseball person with my fucking like shitty ass #1 draft pick card that I showed you before we started, like I love numbers, but like this is so dumb. And so I like tried to write an article not making fun of, but like trying to put out the idea that like numbers don't mean anything. They're just representative of something else.
Sure.
Nobody's read this essay. Nobody.
Nobody's read
it to Cambridge. It's supposed to get published by a Cambridge anthology. 9 months later, in the middle of the pandemic, I got an email back from the editor being like, you need to make some changes. I'm like, okay. He's like, you need to make them by September. No.
You're just not going to do it, or just fuck it?
I was like, that was written like when there was no COVID. That was written like it was about Captain Marvel.
Have you got
any sense at all?
So it's just because it's like we're in the middle of this pandemic and it's just a different mindset. Like the idea of going back and doing that is absurd.
Totally absurd. So I went back. I got an email being like, you have to finish it now. Like now is the time that you have like a day. It's like, cool. Totally cool. So I like went in like, and sorry if you're watching this, Jan, like I'm really sorry, but this is how it worked. Like I thought that I was going to just work on it over and over again, but I didn't want to. I didn't want to at all. So I like waited, and like last weekend, I like reread it and rewrote so many huge parts of it. And like essentially was like, the thing that I realized is that like people have a perspective.
Hmm.
Like you've already bought into your perspective. And like, I think I can get away. What am I trying to say? I don't know. You talk. Sorry. I'm a little drunk.
Well, think about it like this. I mean, if we're talking about like the inaccessibility or the difficulty of so-called of some works of art, specifically books, like it is about individual perspective, because like there are books that I love that I think I will always love, and I tell people to read and they fucking hate, and it's largely just I never get offended if somebody does not like something I love. Like I think my tastes are my tastes, and like I that's why I'm always like, so the idea of like anything being possible in a work of art is fine with me. Like, you know, people hate the music. Like I love music that people just cannot understand why I love. I love metal. I love like Japanese noise music, which is literally just noise for like an hour straight. Yeah, Boredoms are my favorite band.
Boredoms are my favorite band too.
Like Boredoms are the shit. Like I listened to them all through the 90s, and like that's my shit. Like them and Merzbow and all this weird stuff. But it's like if I try to like give that to a friend of mine who's into like Radiohead, you know, or I don't know, any other band, they're like, you know, they don't get it, and that's fine. Like it's fine. I love like there's room for everything, but I understand like I'm never gonna love some things that people love, and I'm never gonna get it. But like I think one of the things that bums me out most as a consumer of art, whether it be like music or film or literature, is like the whole it's too difficult thing. Like I think that's the only time where I get a little bit like elitist and contemptuous, is when people kind of dismiss things for being mildly challenging, which to me I translate as it's just not doing what I expect a book to do. Like I think a book should do this, and when it doesn't do that, that's when I get bummed out.
I think this is where we end this program, is that like I feel like the people okay, so what you're saying I completely agree with. 100% agree with. I also have a problem keep telling people what I like, and I'm like, well, I know you won't like this, but this is a thing that I think is important and it fits this zone. But then most of the people I know are like, I don't really ever listen to anything you say.
So why do you keep saying it?
That's where you end this podcast.
Like that's a good closing thought. So why say it then? I mean, you're a guy who says things. I mean, like you have 3% the website, which has been gracious enough to publish my book reviews, and it's like you have a lot of blog posts, you have the videos, you're a person who you have the podcasts, like 2 podcasts at least that I know of. So, you know, you have things to say. So do you think you're speaking into like the void and no one's listening?
No, I think that I don't think I'm speaking into the void. I think that there's like a group of people who I think that it makes sense to a group of people, and also no, I don't make sense at all.
I mean,
you got me drunk. I
did. It's my fault.
You fucking ruined me. It's an hour and 57 minutes in. I am drunk.
Yes. Well, here's
what I want to say is like, fuck yeah, literature. Do what you want to do.
Yeah.
Like, just love it. Be full on with it though. And like, don't be like a dick about it. Don't be a dick. That's the easiest thing.
When you say don't be a dick, do you mean just like as a publisher, as a writer, as a consumer of lit?
A human being.
Oh, okay. Well, here's a way to sort of like
don't interact with your friends like you're a dick.
No, it's true. Like, okay, quick little thing, and then we can break this. But like, I remember I was in a bar years ago with one of my friends, my buddy Jason, who's about like the most amiable person I've ever met, like the nicest fucking person you'll ever meet in your life. And his favorite book is Catcher in the Rye. You know, a lot of people love that book. And I'm in this bar and I'm having drinks and we're fucking drunk as shit. And this guy who was with us, who was just like a friend of a friend, was being such a prick. And when my buddy Jason said that he loved Catcher in the Rye, that it was like, you know, it's the book that you read when you're like 15 and it fucking gets you interested in literature. Like you retain a fond memory of that. And like this sort of hipper than thou asshole that we were with was like shitting on that book for 15 full minutes at the bar. And I could just see my buddy just like being beaten down into this fucking shell where it's just like, ashamed to love Catcher in the Rye. It's like, love what you love. Like, I don't give a shit. Like, I hated that. It was like one of the worst things I've ever seen a person do. And then I got my revenge because 5 minutes later, the Pixies came on the radio. And I love the Pixies. The Pixies are like, I think they're like the greatest American band ever.
I'm gonna go come right now. I'm gonna go jerk off. Listen to
Surfer Doolittle or Surfer Rosa. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna listen to Surfer Rosa. That's my
Surfer Rosa.
She is everywhere. Live
Cactus,
video
Break
people.
My Body. And I love the Pixies, but when this kid, this pretentious douchebag who was shitting on my friend for loving Catcher in the Rye, I said, "Oh, I love the Pixies," and I just like decided that was my in, and I was like, "You and everybody else." And he's like, "Oh, I'm from Boston." I'm like, "Big fucking deal. So you're an asshole then?" You know, it's just like I shit on him for that, and I later felt guilty about it. But it's just like, fuck him for being a dick. It's like, if you love Catcher in the Rye, if you love the Pixies, if you love, anything, like, just fucking, who cares? Like, just love the things you love and don't be a douche about it.
I mean, isn't that the thing that we've been talking about the whole time? Like, I'm very drunk.
Yay.
The idea is that, like, we love things and, like, relate to them. Like, you relate to art that you like.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about that to me. It's just like, I have very personal reasons for loving my favorite movies. And it's just like, I think of where I was in my life and the things that were going on when I watched them. And when I watch them, they bring me back to that. And it's the same thing with the books in my life. Like, my favorite books usually reflective of something bigger than just the book itself. Like, that's how it is. But so there's no reason why I should shit on anybody for loving anything that I don't give a shit about, but and vice versa. But I think the thing with the difficult literature subject, to kind of put a cap on all this, is it's like, I think it's just really about length. And I think and this is the last question I'll ask you as a publisher, as drunk as you may be. Like, I know you're publishing, lit in translation, and you're not like, I don't know how concerned you are with bottom lines and like how much books sell, but like,
dude, do you know what? Let me answer that first.
Sure.
You know what my bottom line, drunkenly, is that, like, a bunch of fucking shithole people give my university a lot of money, and I take that and do something that's good with it, because those people won't do good things with it. Those people are horrible people. Like, the vast number of people who are giving money to the University of Rochester are pieces of shit. And, like, I take their money and make good for you.
So you basically take their money and turn it into, like, quality literature that enriches.
Robin Hood the fuck out of their donations. Like, I met our new president before we got coveted, whatever. I met her, and she was like, I hate everyone that I have to meet that's on the board, because they'll have, like, Trump cutouts and like these stand-ins of Trump. And she's like, she went to a meeting right when she got hired where someone was like, well, I mean, you can't trust our president because she's like a fucking woman and someone who likes Democrats. And I was like, well, that person should die. And this is like the president of our, like,
oh my God, that's beautiful. So you're taking the money.
I'm 100% like, essentially, like, I will have my viewpoint, and you guys can all go fuck yourself if you don't like it.
So basically, you're taking their money and you're putting out, and this is my segue into one of your more recent books that I have not read. This is a open letter title I have not read, but I don't want to say like intimidating, but it might be mildly, is this fucking thing.
I love that book so much.
I should read this next, right?
Book ever.
I should read this soon, right?
Holy shit. So Mara Fay Leatham, the book you held up, the Adventures and Misadventures of the Extraordinary and Admirable Jan Urpi, I forgot, founder of New Catalonia.
It's a long ass title.
Holy shit. I've never read a book like that. That's like a Barth book, but in translation, and amazing.
Yeah, I got it. I ordered it as soon as it came out because it seemed the kind of thing that I needed to check out. But it's like, there's no like this is a losing proposition for a press is what I'm wondering is it just does not seem like the title alone isn't gonna what's that?
That's just paid for.
But I mean, it just feels like the adventures and misadventures of the extraordinary and admirable Juan Orpi, conquistador and founder of New Catalonia, is like, that's the fucking title. Like that's the title, and it's according to what I'm looking at, where we at, like, yeah, it's 300. It's almost 400 pages long. You know, it's not the kind of thing.
That book is not one of the finalists for the National Book Award in Translation in this year. Then everyone can go fuck themselves and will never apply again. And also, if you're a judge and you decide not to include that, I hate you. I fucking hate you.
You heard it here first.
Your children. I will go find your children. I will take their bones in my mouth and I'll gnaw them. I fucking hate you. Because that is the greatest translation I've ever published.
Really? You're proudest of this? I know you've written really well about it. Like, I know you're very into this.
It's Mara, what she did is like second, third, fourth level. Like, it's amazing.
Yeah, it seems like the kind of thing I need to be familiar with. So that's why I ordered it. I mean, like, I ordered a lot of the books that you
I know you did. I fucking mailed that to you, dude.
It has, in fact, I mean, I know you write these things yourself, but I assume you just like do a template. But it has like the chat post letter of like, it says, "Dear Vince," like you're writing it to me personally or something. Like, it's not the same fucking letter you put out to everybody. But no, I like
everyone is like 29 people.
Geez, I see a book like this, and like this is like maybe a good way to sort of conclude things. Like, this is the kind of thing that like you're doing an open letter that's just not going to come out in a lot of other ways. Like Dalkey, like I these are the kind of books that I want to support, that I'm sort of interested in. And it's just like, I haven't read it. I've had it on my shelf for like a couple of weeks now, at least. It's been sitting there, and I'm reading like, a whole series of other things. I'm reading a book right now that I can't believe I'm fucking reading because I want it to be over. I can't wait for it to be over with. It's a Melville House book that I can't wait. This local writer named Barry Schechter. It's called Useless Miracle. It's good, but it's just like, I'm reading it. Speaking of difficult, like, it's not difficult, but I just can't believe I'm still reading it. I'm like, when is this going to be over? Like, it's fine, but I kind of want to move on to something else. And not to talk shit about Melville House. But it's just like, yeah, this is the kind of thing where it's just like, I want to support it, but it doesn't seem like, I'm sure it's not a difficult book per se, but I can guarantee, like, looking,
funniest thing ever.
I have to assume it's not like a typical thing. Like, it's going to challenge somebody. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, you're right. But like, I don't understand their challenge. I don't get.
That's a good place to, yeah, that's a good point. Like, what is their challenge with this? Like, why can't they get into something like this?
It's not hard.
I mean, even 400 pages is not lengthy. Like, it's not a fat book. Like, Ducks Newbury Point and so forth are like way longer.
You start reading it, you're like, wait, what? And you're like, oh, it's just joke after joke after joke. Like, the way that he gets born out of his mom's ass is amazing.
See, yeah, this might have to. I might have to bump this up.
I want to read about ass fucking. Seriously,
I might have to bump this up in the rotation from like where I'm currently, like my list of to read books. Like, this is like number 5. Maybe I should bump it up to number 2 or number 1.
I should. You probably should.
When I read it, I'll let you know my thoughts when I read it for sure. But it's high on my list because it's definitely. What are you doing? You're like, holy shit. Oh fuck! Here we go.
So I'm no longer a normal Bloomington joint.
So we're no longer drinking and talking. We've evolved into drinking and smoking. Nice. See, I've finished this Teeling bottle in the process. There's the last of it going right now. The last little wee. So celebrate while you take a hit off of that. Like, celebrate the last of this as we conclude. So, what are the laws in Rochester? Are they as relaxed as like everywhere else?
No, they're not. They're gonna be soon. But we also like can go to every state next to us and just get weed.
Last time I saw you in person was in Portland at the AWP, and that was kind of a free for all as far as like all that was concerned.
That was actually where it all started again. Like I was a big weed smoker my whole life, but like I started smoking weed again in Portland with our translator of the Alio Jacol book. So you remember
Portland ruined you, basically. I love it. Portland was like, it's a place to ruin a person. Chad's like,
kill the live thing, let's talk.
Yeah, fuck it, whatever. You know, we're in the last minutes of this. Anything's possible.
Hit the end of it. Close it.
Did you? I forgot to ask. Did you go to AWP last year in fucking San Antonio? No. Okay, good.
No, I was in London. You
kind of
licked COVID. It's like, where's COVID? I'm like, give it to me. Like I tried to get it essentially. Like I literally went everywhere you could get COVID.
I forgot to say you
turn this off and I'll tell you the craziest story you've ever heard.
All right. Give us 5 seconds. I just want to say you ruined AWP in a sense because when we were in Portland, I didn't go to many panels and I didn't talk to many people. I just got fucking beers with you, if I remember correctly. Like it was like, all right, well, you know.
Man. Come have beers with me. Next time we can all have beers. Everyone who's watching this, let's all have beers. I'll have beers with you.
Yes. It does not need to be at AWP, but you don't have to pay several $100s to go to that thing. But
whatever, man. I'll go there. I'll go wherever. Hey, man. Like, hey, yo. Hey, man. Hey, I will totally like. Holy shit, man. I would totally go. Holy shit. I would go to like the end of the earth. I would go to Antarctica, Alaska, Alaska. I'd go to Alaska. I would go there for you, man. Holy shit, man. Holy shit. I would totally be there for you. I would be there for you to just hang out, and we would hang out, and it would be so cool because Alaska, we've got this.
AWP should go there next, yeah, but it's become AWP. I love that AWP has like become the place for me to go to hang out with publishers and writers and just get drunk. Like there's no other purpose to it. It's just to get fucked up.
There are very few things I remember about AWP. Is this still on? You should turn this off.
I should kill this in a sec. But well, say your concluding thoughts of AWP and I'll tell them.
So Brian really hates oh shit. The Queen of the Night. Who wrote the Queen of the Night? Who wrote the Queen of the Night? It's a guy who's like very like he's super smart. He's super oh shit. Queen of the Night.
I'm gonna Google it while you're figuring it out.
Oh my god. He's a really interesting person. Oh, I'm just high now, man. Like I didn't get that.
I have no idea. I can't even Google it. I'm so fucking like fumble fingering right now.
I love this.
I have zero idea.
Is this actually, I have a real weird question, but like, is this essentially just what, when people like my daughter do Twitch, are they just twitching this?
Yeah.
Like, just like you and me talking like this. Like, this
it's way,
like nobody's paying attention to us.
No.
Nobody cares.
Nope.
If they're paying attention, it's not like an important thing.
Well, okay.
It's just evolved.
We've been on for 2 hours and 14 minutes, and we're going to wrap it. But like, no, by this point, anybody who like, I got a comment from someone that said, will this be on your channel, Vince? Because like the idea basically of this comment, which I'm putting right now from James Connell, is basically like, they're basically saying, I want to tune off now. I want to like go do my shit. And like, you're all still going. So
yeah. Oh no, you should leave.
no, yeah, go.
Man.
Yeah,
what are you doing? Like, get the fuck out.
Yeah,
like,
we're almost at 2.5.
I'm
like,
sorry.
Yeah, this is for like purists only.
Oh yeah, get the fuck out. No one's judging you. Like that's a reflecting on us comment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah, go. Like,
yeah.
It's been
Is
been
it
nice.
okay if I'm not here anymore? Like, oh
yeah. Thanks for tuning in. But it's basically like, but no, like to wrap, like the point basically being that, yeah, this is what TikTok is. It's basically people witnessing other people's hubris.
Okay, so if we went on TikTok right now and could share that on our screen, what the fuck would it look like? Come on in here.
I'd be dancing.
He's asking for you.
Okay.
You have to go see about the kid, don't you?
Yes.
Raise a glass.
I'm going to call you back in a minute.
No, you're good. No, go take care of your family. That's good. That's good.
No, they're old. They need to take care of themselves.
I shouldn't put that on broadcast. So, no, go do your thing. Like,
hey, everyone who's watching, my kids are old and should take care of themselves. Bye.
And so that ends another episode of Drinking and Talking. Thank you, those of you who have stuck around. It's under 3 hours this time. All right, and take care. Ciao.